We'll get the recording started. Are we live? Okay, thank you, Pierre. So welcome to the Senate Ag Committee meeting. The committee will come to order. Linda, would you please call the roll?
Senator French?
Here.
Senator Hicks?
He's excused for a little bit. He'll be a few minutes late.
Senator Knight?
Here.
Senator Cole?
Present.
And Chairman Smith?
I'm here. All right. Well, good to see all of you. With that, we'll get started. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 27, Weed and Pest Mitigation, Tribal Inclusion, and the good Senator Ellis will be our first presenter. Welcome, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman Steinmetz. Before you, I have Senate File 27, and this has to do with the Emergency Insect Management Program administered by the state. If you look at your statute books in section or Title 11-5-401, you'll see some of the parameters, and you might be familiar with this program. But essentially, it created a committee which consists of the directors of the Department of Agriculture, Health, Game and Fish, the state veterinarian, and the governor. And they provide programs and funds to combat and control and prevent various infestations of certain pests. And so, Madam Chairman, your Tribal Relations Committee heard testimony in the interim about the benefits of maybe allowing that program to be afforded to our tribal partners. So that's what this bill would do, Madam Chairman. On the bottom of page 1, it would amend the program participation statute to clarify that not only state agencies or political subdivisions, but also the Eastern Shoshone Tribe, the Northern Arapaho Tribe, or the cooperative tribal governing body may apply to the Committee for Participation in the insect management programs under the article. Just for the new members, a few years, I think it was last year, we did a big bill that clarified that in our statutes, we will always refer to the Eastern Shoshone Tribe first, so they may apply solo and independent for the funding or to participate in the program, the Northern Arapaho Tribe, or what we refer to as the cooperative tribal governing body. Years ago, we used to use the term joint council, and since then, that time, that term has evolved or dissolved, and they now refer to themselves as the Intertribal Council. So we use the term cooperative tribal governing body as somewhat of a catch-all in case that terminology changes in the future. So with that, I don't have any, if you have very specific questions about the program itself, I know the Department of Agriculture is here and can answer those specific questions, but that's the intent of this bill.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Are there any questions for Senator Ellis? Any questions? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Ellis. I'm one of the new guys here, and I don't want to waste a lot of time, but can you explain the sovereignty with the tribes and the state just a little bit to have a little perspective on this bill? Thank you.
Yeah, historically, when the United States was establishing itself as a country, it worked with tribes on a government-to-government basis, which is why you see things like treaty making, which were agreements between separate sovereigns. And so throughout that history, tribes are always thought to be sovereigns that divine their sovereignty on their own. They don't, it's not a delegation of sovereignty like the federal government didn't delegate their federal sovereignty to the tribes. So if you think of the state of Wyoming, we divine our sovereignty by the simple act of being a state. We delegate our authority, though, to political subdivisions for them to act. So your towns and cities and councils, when they take action, it's under Wyoming sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty is separate from all of that. It's a separate sovereign, much like a state or the federal government. Through some U.S. Supreme Court decisions, there are some caveats with that sovereignty, but that more or less is the theory of why they've got their own separate structure. And then just to add, we've also worked on some bills in other areas, the Business Council programs. Our Attorney General's office has been very strict in its interpretation. So when you see that any state agency or political subdivision may apply for funding, that really does exclude tribes. So this bill would be necessary for them to participate in these programs.
All right, any further questions for Senator Ellis? Okay, seeing none, we might call you back up. All right, is there anyone from the agency here to testify on this bill? Give us some insight. Welcome, Director.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Doug Miyamoto with the Department of Agriculture.
I don't have a lot to add for explanation of the bill or any impacts that it would have on our agency. There has been allocations from this pot of money to the tribes in the past. It was done through the Fremont County Weed and Pest and Wyoming Department of Health as two examples, but it shouldn't even change the allocation amounts to individual municipalities or other political subdivisions. So the impact would be minimal in terms of dollars and cents. Just for the committee's information, this is a program that annually allocates about $720,000 out across the counties and cities in Wyoming, primarily for West Nile virus and grasshopper control. None of that would change. This just would make the tribes eligible to administer their own grants. And with that, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, Director, when you talk about a pot of money, what's the source of revenue for that pot of money?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, this is general fund.
So it is general fund money that is administered through the Department of Agriculture and then distributed out to weed and pest districts. And by adding tribal members, they'd be eligible to participate in these general funded projects. So thank you for that. One other clarification. Typically because it says in here that they're grant funds, are they 100% grant or are they 50%? What are the terms and conditions of the grants?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, they are grants and they are, there is no match requirement.
So,
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, if we can continue, how is this administered? So once you receive the grant, obviously somebody has to contract with somebody to do that. And it talks about I guess the department would help with the grants and then the administration of the money on that to those contractors. And then what's the auditing process and all that stuff for these monies? When we go back to the weed and pest districts, is there an audit function?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, yeah, the grants are administered on a reimbursable basis. So that helps to some degree. And then there's final report requirements and there's an audit provision in there as well. Not 100% of them are audited all the time, but they could be.
And Madam Chairman, if I may, you also talk in your fiscal note here about the Department of Health have sponsored on these type of grants in the past. What was the nature of those?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, that was for West Nile virus control.
And so on those West Nile control, same pot of money.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just on a question about grant compliance. Ultimately, is the state responsible for say, non-grant compliance? And then are we going to be in jeopardy of non-compliance for a certain type of grant? Say in this case, how do you hold the parties responsible in this case, like for grant compliance? Because it seems like they are a unique entity. And with that, does that have unique challenges for compliance?
Madam Chairman, Senator, our primary way of dealing with that is making those grants done on a reimbursable basis. So the grantee is coming out of pocket first and paying for, whatever services are needed for mosquito control or grasshopper control, and then they submit those paid bills back to the state of Wyoming. And if it's non-compliant, it's wouldn't be reimbursed.
All right, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There again, being new, and some of the people on the panel here might be able to help me too. So we get an appropriation, I assume, for the weed and pest through the Department of Ag every year. And I don't know exactly how that works, but you'd made one comment to where it really wouldn't change the allocation to the cities and towns. Is everybody sharing in that same appropriation that we're allowed per biennium? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Senator, that's correct. So as I testified earlier, it's about $720,000 a year that's available for allocation. We typically get somewhere on the order of around $1 million of grant requests. So there's more requests than there is money available. It's a competitive grant. So everybody that applies has an application that they fill out. And we take a look at risk of West Nile virus infection as an example, or severity of infestation for grasshoppers would be another example. And we have a ranking criteria that the committee goes through to help determine what the allocation amount should be. And so that's how the grants are administered by the committee.
You good?
Madam Chairman.
Senator Hicks?
So, Director, just walk me through who reviews the grants and then makes the final decision on the allocation for those grants. I'll get up here a little closer. My apologies. Mr. Director, you've got a competitive grant process and they submit grants to the Department of Agriculture. Who reviews those and then makes a determination based on what criteria, and who in the department then says you get funded, you don't?
Madam Chairman, Senator, the committee are the ones that make the ultimate decision about grant funding. The way that the criteria was developed was our weed and pest coordinator basically assembled a draft of trying to emulate the statutory or the intent of the program, which was to combat West Nile virus primarily. And so took into account some location data and past data of infestation rates or infection rates, built that into the funding criteria. And then also some past grant performance type of metrics that could be used. And then the committee voted to approve the grant criteria. And then that's what we use now to score essentially the grant applications as they come in. Once the committee approves those grants in terms of priority, then ultimately we as the Department of Ag then have the responsibility to track those expenditures, take in the receipts and make the payment.
So by expanding the utilization of the program, it potentially could impact other communities. And I haven't looked for a while, but it seemed like for the last couple of West Nile outbreaks, Fremont County was like the bullseye area for the state of Wyoming. Is that not correct?
Madam Chairman, Senator, that is correct. The way that it had been managed in the past, Fremont County Weed and Pest included tribal areas under the areas that they would spray for West Nile virus. So it could impact the allocation depending on the amounts that are applied for by the tribes versus what was applied for them in the past.
So, Madam Chairman, that leads me to the question, if the Weed and Pest has already been doing this and including those areas on the reservation, why do we need this bill if it's already been practiced that way?
Madam Chairman, Senator, it makes them eligible to decide for themselves if they would like to administer their own grant, as opposed to having some other political subdivision do it on their behalf. It was the only mechanism for them to participate prior to this.
So they had to work with the Weed and Pest District.
Madam Chairman, Senator, either them or this last year, they went through the Department of Health.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And Director, I just had a couple of questions. First of all, we know this is coming from the general fund, but what are the fees associated to collect that pot of money in the general fund? Is it the certificates from the pesticide companies or the local mill on that, or where's the money come from?
Madam Chairman, I don't know what the source of funds are. All I get is that it comes out of the general fund, which is separate from Weed and Pest and how they are typically funded in most of the other programs. The pesticide registration fee is one that primarily funds the rest of the work that the Weed and Pest does for invasive species type of plant work. This is focused on insects of an emergency type of nature. So all I know is it's generally funded. Don't know the source beyond that.
Okay, and then one other question I had in looking through the statutes surrounding the program is that if it's grasshoppers or Mormon crickets or other outbreaks of insects, it could be up to 75% of the program costs. Is that right?
Madam Chairman, I believe you're correct, but I don't have that information in front of me. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I just was curious. So, all right. Are there any further questions for the director? Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Overall, I guess I reiterate, if you could, the cost of the current program you have, and when you make this change that we're proposing, will that have any deleterious effects on the overall program that you currently have? In other words, you got a pot of money, and now you got more folks pulling out of the pot of money or not. Could you please explain how that would work for the services you currently are providing?
Madam Chairman, Senator, yes, so each year, if we take our biennium allocation and split that in half, that's where I come up with that $720,000 a year that's available to allocate to any eligible applicant. And what would happen with the passage of this bill is we would potentially have 2 more eligible applicants than we do today. 3, yeah, you're right. 3 more potential eligible applicants. And so that may result in smaller allocations for the total number of applicants. But there have been times when an applicant hasn't been funded at all. So it would just depend on how the application ranks out in the process and the affiliated, the scores of those grants that would dictate which allocations are funded and which ones aren't.
Go ahead.
Would that potentially lead you to ask for more money for the program?
Madam Chairman, Senator, that's not my intent today. I don't foresee that as being, it's not a priority for the Department of Ag right now to ask for more.
Thank you.
Senator French?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chairman. You said that there's usually like $1 million worth of requests, and you can only fund whatever, 720,000 or whatever. If you have, does the committee, if you have repeat people applying, do they stagger that? So I applied and I didn't get it, and the chairman applied and got it. Next year, if we both have projects again, do they set that person aside maybe that's got funded last year? Do they kind of rotate it for a fairness issue, I guess?
Madam Chairman, Senator, we do keep records of who has applied and how much we've been able to allocate for each of the applicants, and do talk about that in the allocation process. It's the same people that sit on the committee year after year, so they seem to be familiar with past projects. The allocation ultimately comes down to the score in the ranking criteria, and basically that's assessed on risk of contracting West Nile virus is the bulk of the money that goes out.
Further questions, committee? All right, seeing no further questions, we might call you back up later if we have another one, but thank you, Director. All right, is there any public comment on this bill?
Madam
in the room?
Chairman?
Yes,
If I may,
yes.
could we have Senator Ellis come back up,
Yeah.
please?
Yes, we can. Senator Ellis.
Senator Ellis, I know you're extremely knowledgeable on this, but it seems to me because of the health nexus associated with West Nile virus, are you aware of any programs that could be administered through the Department of Health for this purposes through BIA funding that comes to the tribes?
Madam Chair, I don't know. I would add that one discussion point we had is, we could talk about this maybe taking away from the pot of money from other localities, but there's also, we need to acknowledge the fact that these critters don't necessarily know boundary lines. And so it might make sense for the safety of Wyoming and the neighboring area to treat that particular area and make that a priority in order to contain any kind of infestation. So it's not a, there's a little bit more to consider when we're just talking about fund allocation and maybe lessening the pot. It's cheaper if you catch those infestations, I would assume, earlier rather than letting them get worse. And so that's where I think we want to be more inclusive and, recognizing that the tribes are not political subdivisions. They shouldn't be at the beck and call or having to call Fremont County Weed and Pest when they're at their own sovereign nation. So that's really one of the considerations that weighed heavily on us in bringing this bill.
Madam Chairman.
Go right ahead.
So Senator, I think you brought up part of my point that I wanted to get to is it seems like because of the nature of these things and they don't know boundaries, that this should be done in a collaborative effort. And the nature of the tribal politics up there as good as anybody. And so what is wrong with the program? What is not working now, working with the two tribes through the Weed and Pest District? What's broke?
So
Why doesn't it work?
Sure. One, I think, area that makes this clear is that there are some areas of the reservation that tend to be more occupied by Eastern Shoshone tribal members versus Northern Arapaho. And in other statutes, we've had barriers where we require that anytime they want to participate in certain programs, that it could come from a joint request. So this is, I think, an important way for us to give some flexibility, recognizing the sovereignty of each tribe to approach the state of Wyoming. And certainly, as the director mentioned, there's no guarantee for this funds. I didn't realize that it was reimbursable. So I think that's an important check on this, but
So
that's one area that's broken.
just,
Go ahead.
and you know the nature better than anybody up there, and I think you described part of my concerns. So the way this is currently structured, you could have one tribe apply for the money and just spray that area within the reservation where they're highly, where the potential outbreak's at, but not cross another part of the reservation. And it's bifurcated. And I guess back to your initial point, these things don't know boundaries. They don't know who lives in what part of the reservation or where the reservation boundaries end. And it just seems to me that it should be done in a cooperative, collaborative fashion with both tribes in the Weed and Pest District to make sure that the state of Wyoming is getting the best bang for their buck and making sure that all people are served through the program. So by enumerating out 3 different entities, I think we've set up a situation where it's possible that wouldn't happen.
Mr. Chair, or Madam Chairman, I would disagree. So it's important to know that the reservation doesn't just have reservation land. Within the reservation, it was allotted a number of years ago, so you actually have some fee lands located within the reservation. There are some tribal trust lands where both tribes, much like a married couple, have joint ownership over those lands. So in those instances, I think it would make sense probably for both tribes to have to sign off on any kind of weed and pest request or activity that goes on there. But there are also other pockets and there are also other tribal members where you might have Northern Arapaho versus Eastern Shoshone. And so, Mr. Chairman, this isn't, I think this language reflects that and gives us the flexibility. And I think through the rulemaking process and how the commission decides on how to allocate these funds, I think all of those kind of issues can be sorted out so that we're not having the concern that you're raising.
But a question, but you just said through the rulemaking process, and I'm trying to find out where that's at in the bill.
Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairman, I would ask the Department of Ag. We didn't cite it in here because I think they have broad rulemaking authority to administer these kind of programs, or the commission, so we could double check on that. And I apologize, I brought my wrong title book. So I brought my statutes, I just brought the wrong book, so I could double check on that for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. All right. Is there any public testimony? Come on up. All right. Please state your name and let us know who you're with.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Travis McNevin here on behalf of the Northern Arapaho Business Council. I certainly want to express our appreciation for the willingness for the bill to come before your committee today and for the work that the Tribal Relations Committee did over the interim under Representative Larson and Senator Ellis's leadership. Bill has been, discussed. A lot of questions have already been asked by senators to Senator Ellis as well as the department. Obviously, here in support of the bill, and would be happy to address any questions that I may.
Questions for Mr. McNiven? Any questions? All right, seeing
All right.
none, we'll let you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Next up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. For the big thing I think is that it's already been mentioned, these things don't know boundaries. If we can get a better collaboration and better all working together, we help everybody reduce the problem with that. I would sit for any questions supporting the bill.
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
So, Madam Chairman, I agree with you 100%. But I don't see anything in the bill that would require collaboration. And so that's my overriding concern is, and so I think it's a good idea, just like we do weed management districts and all these other things where it's a collaborative effort with everybody. I just don't see that there's any requirement for that in this bill. How do you envision this working when each one of these entities could apply separately and some may or may not? And they may not be coordinated with the Fremont County Weed and Pest District, so.
Chairman, Senator, my hope, and I think it will work. If it doesn't work, we can come back and work on the problem again. But I think having this, I think it will improve it. I have confidence that it will. You raise a good point. It's not ever required per se, but when the groups come together and work on a common problem, it works. I have confidence that this will work, sir.
Any further questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you.
Thank you.
Further public comment
Madam Chairman,
in the room? Senator Hicks, we need to go online first and see if there's anyone on Zoom. We don't have anyone on Zoom, so Senator Hicks.
I'm just wondering if there's any representatives from the Eastern Shoshone Tribe or the cooperative tribal government body that is testified before the Joint Ag Committee, pro or con for this bill, either now. Is there anybody in the audience or anybody in the past when the bill was constructed?
Mr. Senator Hicks, we have not seen them before us. Would you like to ask Senator Ellis if they were at her meetings? Go right ahead, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chair. Senator Hicks, the Eastern Shoshone, to my recollection, did not support either in favor or against this bill. And then to clarify, I think it's under 11.5.119 that talks about rulemaking authority.
All right, as Senator French.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. To Senator Ellis, if I may.
I guess we need you back, Senator Ellis. Sorry, we weren't quite done with you. Thank you for accommodating us. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Ellis. Did they state why they were against it? I mean, was there a reason? Didn't you say they didn't support the bill?
Madam Chair, Senator French, to clarify, I can't remember exactly. I don't believe that they testified either in support or against.
Oh, okay.
And remain neutral. So there was no
All right.
opposition to it.
Thank you
Okay,
for the
thank you.
clarification. Thank you. All right, all right. So seeing that there is no further public comment, we will close public comment. And then Senator Kolb, to you, unless you have questions, more questions, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a question, I'm a little confused of a committee or commission. I don't know who's making these decisions on the allocation of the funds. I guess I would like to get some clarification on the number of folks there and just what their affiliation is, if any, to be on that committee. I'm not sure what this is on the decisions on these weed and pest allocations.
Senator Ellis, would you like to answer, or Director Miyamoto, who has the answer to that question for us?
Madam Chairman, Senator, the committee is comprised of the director from the Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, Wyoming Game and Fish, the state veterinarian, and the governor.
Okay, thank you very much. Does that clarify for you? Do you have any others before we let her go? All right, all right. Thank you, Senator Kolb. All right, committee, we're done with public comment now. So committee, what is your pleasure on the bill? We'll see if we move it and then we'll have discussion and amendments. So
I'll move the bill.
moved by Senator French. Do we have a second? All right, seeing no second, the bill is indefinitely postponed and dies for a lack of a second. So Senate File 27 is indefinitely postponed.
Madam Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
I think this is a framework for what we need to do. My lack of support at this time is I would like to see more coordination, and I'd like to see more input from all the tribes, and make sure that they're interested in working with the weed and pest. And I think it just needs a little more work, but I think it's the right thing to do. And I think this is something that the Ag Committee or working through tribal relations should continue to pursue, because it is inherently in everybody's best interest that we control these vectors for these diseases. So I appreciate the work, Senator, that you've done on tribal relations. As you know, sometimes these things take a year or two. This is an effort that's worth pursuing, and I think we ought to continue to work on this to effectuate it to happen. I just think I'd like to see more cooperation and collaboration on how this is done, and not strictly just for the tribes. I think statewide that we need better coordination between our municipalities and our weed and pest districts in those rural areas when we have these outbreaks. And so that's kind of a directive also to the director of the Department of Agriculture, and I think we can continue this discussion through the interim. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hicks, and I would second those remarks. So we're happy to keep working with you, Senator Ellis. So the next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 28, Livestock Infectious Disease Control Tribal Inclusion. And Senator Ellis, you're up again.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So if you like the last one, you're really going to like this one. This is a 2-year effort we've been working on. It came to the House last year, but died just running out of time. But you'll recall that the state veterinarian has a duty to investigate contagious and infectious diseases among domestic animals. And so that inspection requirement, if the state vet has reason to believe that some animals might be harboring some diseases, they have duties and obligations to gather and quarantine those kind of in those situations. When it comes to the reservation, the state of Wyoming does not have the authority to do that kind of investigation, let alone gather and quarantine. But I think there's always concern about potential outbreaks that might occur in cattle on the reservation. And so our approach was more of a collaborative one rather than a heavy-handed one. And so what we wanted to clarify that instead of providing a penalty or trying to intrude on the state's or the tribe's sovereignty, this would clarify that the state veterinarian may provide contagious and infectious reportable disease testing, containment, and reimbursement services to any livestock producer in Wyoming, including those on the Wind River Reservation, who comply with the applicable program requirements, rules, and any orders or regulations issued pursuant to the testing results or program requirements. So here, this is a voluntary program. If the services are on the Wind River Reservation, then cooperative agreements would need to be entered in between the Wyoming Livestock Board in consultation with the state veterinarian, the Eastern Shoshone Tribe, the Northern Arapaho Tribe. And here, Madam Chair, if this bill were to advance, on line 15 through 16, a small amendment to make the language conform to just say Eastern Shoshone Tribe, the Northern Arapaho Tribe, or the cooperative tribal governing body. I think that both tribes is redundant on those lines. And so there's distinction there, and I can, as you know, we have the state veterinarian as well as the livestock board in the room to answer particular questions that you might have on how those programs are administered. But the rest of the bill, it just is a conforming amendment talking about controlling brucellosis, what we do with the sale of diseased cattle. Again, just trying to make that conforming amendment. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions on this bill.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Any questions for Senator Ellis? Questions for Senator Ellis? Okay, I think we'll bring up the director and we might have you back, and our good state veterinarian is here, I see. Welcome back. All right. Well, please go ahead and enlighten us on this good little bill.
Madam Chairman, Committee, Steve True, Director at the Wyoming Livestock Board, and Dr. Holly Hazel, our state veterinarian. This is a bill that we talked about a lot with Select Tribal a year ago, and in your counterparts Ag Committee. So what this bill actually does that works for us is we have a small concern with some of the wildlife that can drift in and out of the boundaries of the reservation that carry some diseases, and this bill would allow producers that would comply with our rules and statutes to be able to avail themselves of the indemnity programs based on those diseases. Brucellosis TB, scrapie, which is sheep, which doesn't really apply to this statute, but there is an indemnity program created years ago by your body that would allow them to avail themselves of that if they were to come up positive in one of those disease testing activities. And as the senator mentioned, the rest of that is just kind of some language to include those belonging to the reservation or producers on the reservation to other producers in the state as those are applied to them. So with that, you may, I won't answer any science questions. Dr. Hazel will do that, but if you have any questions for me on the administration of this, I'm more than happy to answer that.
All right, questions from the committee for the director? Senator Hicks.
Director True, it gets to the indemnification program that we have. What's been the utilization for that? We actually gone in there and slaughtered livestock, say, over the last decade or two here in livestock. I know back in my previous days on this committee, there was a lot of discussion of who determines value. So that's one question. How much have we utilized the program for the indemnification, and what, if you have any idea what those costs were?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, in my tenure here, we've utilized the program several times. We've paid out of the disposal indemnity account twice this year already. You might recall in 2011, that was a break off of the brucellosis funding, one-time non-revertible money. I believe our balance this year prior to our indemnity claims was about $570,000 in that account. So the market value, the second part of your statement, is Dr. Hazel in her report will provide sex, weight, type, whether it's a bred heifer, open heifer, whatever, and we will go to the markets in the state and find a comparable market value the week that the indemnification or the necropsy took place. And that's how we apply that. The federal government, USDA, pays $250. The state indemnity account pays the balance of that market value of that animal to the producer.
Madam Chairman, Director, is the reservation in the surveillance area and that part of Fremont County?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, not at this time. Well, no. Let me say that as a no. They border with some elk that could move back and forth, and many of their producers were in favor of this in order to maintain their ability to market just like other producers in the state. We look at those producers as Wyoming producers, just like everybody else. We need to protect their marketability just as they need to help protect everyone else in the state.
And Mr. True, I'm not questioning whether we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
It affects every producer in that area
Right.
once there's a quarantine that goes in place. And so I'm just trying to understand the nature of, because I haven't been on this committee for quite some time, get up to speed, but it is not in a surveillance area right now. And so the first thing that would have to happen would be an agreement to include the reservation into the surveillance area for testing purposes or not.
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, no, because if this were to happen to you in bags, if you were to have a positive, you could avail yourself of these as a Wyoming producer. But the tribes, due to their sovereign status, were not able to do that. That was the genesis of this bill.
Okay.
So the DSA and the indemnity programs are separate. The testing and containment starts in the DSA, but if you were to have a brucellosis positive, and Dr. Hazel will probably elaborate on that, even in your area, you could become eligible for these reimbursements.
And Director True, and I'm looking back through here, and maybe Senator Ellis might be able to answer this question, trying to find it, but you would have to have at least 2 agreements in place, one for the Northern Arapahoe and one for the Shoshone, or you could just have one with the Joint Cooperative Council to do this. Is that correct?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, correct. And even without the agreement, if we had an individual producer at this time with the verbiage about who would comply verbally to this, we could deal with an individual producer who, if he had a slaughter positive come back from the slaughter plant or something, one producer could avail himself of this by virtue of that, or we can build an MOU with the tribes for all producers in their area. That was my understanding of the original intent of that.
So how do you go about doing an agreement with a single producer?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Senator Hicks, I might let Dr. Hazel talk you through a process, what happens there.
Chairman
Go
Stein,
ahead. Yes, go ahead, Dr. Hazel. Thank you.
Chairman Steinmetz, Hallie Hazel, Wyoming State Veterinarian, Senator Hicks. Whenever we have a producer that is suspected of having a contagious or infectious disease, or has been confirmed, in this case, it would be a confirmed producer, we develop what's called a herd plan or a mitigation plan or a herd plan with that producer, which outlines, in this case, it's their herd affected plan, which outlines how they become free of that disease, the steps they have to follow, this action that must be taken to be free of that disease. That herd plan or that affected herd plan then becomes basically the cooperative agreement that we utilize for that producer to make them free of the disease.
Okay,
But they would have to enter into agreement with a herd plan with the state vet or the livestock board.
Chairman Steinmetz, Senator Hicks, the herd plan is developed in cooperation between the state veterinarian and that producer, and it's a product of the livestock board in itself.
Madam Chairman, so
Yes.
acting in your capacity is with the livestock board. Is that what I heard you say?
Chairman Steinmetz, Senator Hicks, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Director, Doctor. Just a couple of questions here, getting my thoughts straight. First part of this bill says that this expands the governor's authority to negotiate on brucellosis containment. I guess a lot of what I'm scratching my head on a little bit is who has the ultimate authority to make determination on the brucellosis. And I kind of relate it back to a little bit on the pandemic that we recently had, and a lot of that authority been pushed off to public health authorities and having full autonomy effectively to decide what's right and what's wrong, and or what's dangerous and what isn't. So if you had a rancher that disagreed with the authority of whoever it is, whether it's the state veterinarian, I'm not sure if that's where it ultimately, who makes that decision. Can you kind of color me on that a little bit? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Senator Ide, a couple of quick things. One, if a producer disagrees with the state veterinarian's determination of a quarantine or a movement restriction or any of that, there's an administrative hearings path through the livestock board that they would follow on that. The governor's ability to negotiate, I don't have the statute right in front of me, but the governor is, it's 19111, I believe, that can establish emergencies for reportable diseases and inhibit importation or exportation for certain cases. This statute allows him to negotiate with other parties based on livestock interactions, other parties being most likely other states, for him to make those negotiations. Those are outside our purview As an executive branch agency, that needs to come from the chief executive to negotiate at that level if they're going to treat an outbreak with another state in some fashion. So that's the governor's role in this. A little quick piece of history. We formerly had what was an area labeled an area of concern. And you'll hear you already heard some commentary about a change and update on language in that bill. Over time, we were able through game and fish testing to alleviate any need for that. Our board voted to rescind the area of concern, requires the governor's signature to make that area go away. So those are some of his authorities in that. But that's what this is. As far as any negotiation, his would be state to state, entity to entity. This would allow him to negotiate with the tribes above and beyond any MOU we might have if there was some kind of an outbreak. I hope that answers your question.
All right. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just the fiscal note. So you were quite clear to say you can't indeterminable on the increase. Well, is it definitely not going to be a decrease? And I guess, and the percent of funds used, I don't know what you consume during a biennium for your funds. Is it 100%, half the funds? I have no idea. So could you elaborate on that?
Madam Chairman, Senator Kolb, last part first, we use all of our brucellosis testing funds every biennium. Most of the monies in this would come out of that indemnity account. And there is a floor on that. If it reaches $100,000, we can no longer do any mitigation reimbursements. And then at that time, I suspect that I'll be back in front of you asking if you want to reload that one-time money again. So it's indeterminable, not knowing whether we're going to forge an MOU with the Tribe for All producers, or if we had one guy, or if he had 5 contact herds around him. That's a total unknown at this point. It may or may not drain resources that go otherwise into brucellosis testing, but at this point, it's totally an unknown.
Any further questions from the committee? Well, I have one of my own, and I was just wondering, how is this working now? I mean, clearly, brucellosis has been here for a long time, and we've been dealing with it. So how do things work now? Could you walk us through that?
Madam Chairman, as far as tribal interaction?
Yes, uh-huh.
We would have to go back to the early 2000s, I think. Dr. Logan had a positive on the reservation. That producer complied and was totally cooperative. We have not had any activity there, but we haven't tested there. There were 3 elk in 2019 that tested seropositive that trailed through the reservation. One of those was to Dr. Logan and I, frighteningly close to some cattle summer range, even though this was the winter, the cattle weren't there, up towards Crowheart. All 3 of those elk are dead at this point, but we haven't tested there again. That was part of a Game and Fish UW mule deer initiative testing. And while they were testing for migration corridors on the mule deer, they captured some elk as well at that time. That was kind of our concern when this started. We just wanted to know about that, but we're working at it backwards through the producers, trying to get there and then see if we can work with Tribal Game and Fish to maybe test some elk.
Okay, all right. And then I did find that subsection you were referring to, 1119-111, which is regulation of importation of animals, prohibited acts and penalties and applicability. And the governor, upon recommendation, can regulate and deal with that. But what authority does the governor have now to deal with the tribes as from one sovereign to another?
Madam Chairman, I think that's correct. And I would also probably state that forging an MOU with the tribes, we're going to do that through the governor's office and through the tribal liaisons as well. We work preliminarily on that on our own, but we won't finish one of those on our own. That negotiation between these 2 sovereigns and us will work through the governor's office as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the director or the state veterinarian? All right, thank you. Stay close.
Thank
We
you.
might have some more. All right, is there any public comment on this bill? Senator Hicks?
Madam Chairman, if I got a question for Senator Ellis, maybe she can help me out.
Okay, go ahead. If you would please come back, Senator Ellis.
So on page 3, and we go to line 19, this deals with the sale of diseased cattle or domestic bison. And I'm aware that the tribes have reintroduced bison on portions of the reservation. The distinguishment in Wyoming statutes is wild bison and domestic bison is completely different. And so because they are a sovereign, do the tribes classify the bison that they have on the reservation as wild or wildlife, or are they domestic livestock? And that's very important from a standpoint that if we get into an indemnification program and slaughter those. So do you know what they're designated as either wildlife or livestock on the reservation?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, the tribes have jointly promulgated a tribal law and order code, and they have a fish and game code. I would need to look at that code to see. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay, Madam Chairman,
Yes.
Senator, if you could follow up on that, because we need to know that question.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, might be someone in the room who knows that too, so.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you, Senator Ellis. All right, now we'll take public testimony. Go right ahead. Mr. McNiven, welcome back.
Thank you, Chairman Steinmetz. Travis McNiven on behalf of the Northern Arapaho Business Council. Again, want to thank the Tribal Relations Committee. As was testified by the Department of Livestock Department, this bill came about from a request, if you will, to survey and have monitoring abilities within the reservation by the state. As was also previously explained of the jurisdictional issues, that is permission has to be granted or some sort of MOU or cooperative agreement needs to be in place for that because of the jurisdiction on the reservation. Senator Hicks has had a good question and point about the surveillance area as it borders the reservation. The reason those lands go up to the reservation border is, of course, jurisdiction. It doesn't mean the risk stops at that particular junction, as elk from the greater Yellowstone ecosystem tend to traverse those areas. In the past, we've seen a lot of brucellosis and quarantine needs, north in Park County, Sublette County, Teton County, and all of those herds and all those animals certainly frequent and cross, particularly on the northwest corner of the reservation, where there are needs. And so this bill, we believe, helps protect the brucellosis-free status of the state, simply put. And the way that it does that is it opens the door for those cooperative agreements to be put in place so that we do know the brucellosis prevalence or lack thereof, preferably within tribal producer herds. Right now, we are just blind, I guess, as if you would, of knowing what the prevalence there is as far as the testing. There's no, and by that I mean there's no active monitoring going on like we have in the disease surveillance area. So all of this does put, to Senator Hicks's point about collaboration and cooperation and such, a mechanism in place so that we can protect the brucellosis-free status of the state and all the producers there, while also providing some certainty for those tribal producers or the tribes on a volunteer basis of receiving funds or participation in those programs that currently exist in order to protect that brucellosis-free status. So the Business Council is supportive of this legislation and happy to answer any questions.
All right, questions, committee? Any questions? Seeing none,
Thank you,
Stick
Chairman.
around, we might have one later. All right. All right, further public testimony, come on up. Welcome to the Senate Ag Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Kit Wetland. I work as special counsel and tribal relations policy advisor for Governor Gordon. I just wanted to come up and give a short, my short 2 cents on this bill, just to say the governor's office does support this bill and what it's trying to achieve. It's something that the governor's office, both through our liaisons, both in consultation with the tribes, have worked on with the select committee last year as well. And this is a good program, and we do have good relationships with each tribe currently, and there are open lines of communication.
All right, committee questions for Mr. Wetland? All right, oh, Senator Ide.
Oh, it was for the committee, that's okay.
Okay, all right, thank you for being here, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
You're welcome. All right. Is there no public comment online? One more public comment here in the room.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, again, sitting in support of this bill for the protection of the Wyoming livestock industry. I do have to agree with Senator Hicks. Having the answer about how the bison are treated is important. I look forward to hearing what the results, the answer to that question, but sitting in support of the bill. With that, Chairman Steinmetz, I would sit for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Any questions for Mr. Moline? All right, seeing none. Committee, this is a really important bill, and we do have a looming question. And so I guess I'd like to, before we have any movement on the bill, would the committee be amenable to holding the bill over to get some questions answered before we take it up for a vote?
Madam Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
I'm comfortable with voting on the bill. We can work with Senator Ellis and find out the answer. And that could be a simple committee of the whole, or even a second reading amendment to make a determination as to whether bison are classified as wildlife on the reservation, because under our statutes, and because we classify them in Wyoming as either livestock or wildlife, wildlife's not eligible participation, and particularly in the indemnification program. So I think that, and I would defer to Senator Ellis, but I think we can get that question by the time it gets to the floor. So I'm comfortable with moving the bill and then working on that amendment as we get the information becomes available.
Thank you for your comments, Senator Hicks. What about the rest of the committee? Are you comfortable moving forward, or do you need those questions answered before we vote? Senator Cole.
Questions answered before we vote.
Okay.
Strike domestic bison out of there and just make an amendment.
Okay, if we proceed forward with the bill, you can definitely make that amendment as we go forward. So polling the committee, I guess we'll just do it this way. Committee, what is your pleasure on this bill?
Madam Chairman, I'll move the bill for sake of discussion.
Right, turn on your microphone and then you can.
All right. Madam Chairman, I'll move the bill. I'm just cognizant of the fact that we have a long ways to go, and you know, we can always lay this bill back until we get that answer. We've got time to do that, and rather than notice it back for another complete committee hearing on something that I think could be answered, I think it just expedites the committee's time, but I'm certainly inclined to go with whatever the majority of the committee is.
All right, so we have the bill is moved. Do we have a second on the bill? Seeing no second, I think the committee would like to lay the bill back. Senator Hicks, even though you are the majority floor leader and you do control our calendar, We will hold this bill over until we get some of our questions answered, and so we'll hold this bill over for a vote until Thursday. We know it's an important piece of legislation. So the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 68, prescriptive easement for water conveyances. And Senator Hicks, I believe that is your bill as the Select Water Committee Chairman. Thank you, Pierre. All right, Senator Hicks, begin when you're ready.
Madam Chairman, I present to you Senate File 68, prescriptive easements for water conveyances. This is a bill brought by the Select Water Committee. We did at least 2 years of study on this bill. Part of it, we started on this and then we got into the COVID stuff and it kind of languished through that stuff. We brought it back this year to kind of look at it again and work the bill pretty hard. So Madam Chairman, if I may, what I'd like to do is describe the nature of the issue that we're trying to address here. And the issue that we're trying to address with is water conveyance systems, primarily ditches and to a lesser extent pipelines, but canals and ditches for primary purposes for agriculture, although it would not limit it to that. It says any water conveyance system. But what we're continuing to see as Wyoming's populations grow and subdivision of agricultural lands, the nature of most ditches is they don't start on your property unless you have a very, very large ranch because gravity is the way they operate. So they usually start someplace way up here. And then to get to all the water users, sometimes they have to cross many pieces of property before they actually get to where the water is tied to the land for that beneficial use of irrigation. What we're seeing is as we continue to see subdivision and development and not necessarily construction, but just dividing up parcels of land, people don't understand the nature that ditch has a little bit of history there. And so what the history that we're trying to deal with here is in those cases where whoever did the initial ditch never went and platted an easement with the county on that property. And it's not unusual. It's been thought for a long time within the state of Wyoming, as long as I have a water right, I have an easement. In fact, that's not articulated anywhere in statutes. And so what we have is we have a lot of ditches around the state of Wyoming that cross a lot of different parcels of property. And as people change and cultural and understanding of the nature of things change, what we're finding out is there is no recorded easement. Historically, the way this issue has been dealt with is by what we call prescriptive easements, Madam Chairman. And what I'd like to do is just kind of walk through the bill now and talk about what a prescriptive easement is and is not. So a prescriptive easement for water conveyances, Madam Chairman, if we start on page 1, to be eligible for a prescriptive easement, that ditch or that right for the use of that property, that ditch would have to be in place for at least 10 years. In other words, I can't own a piece of property, go pull a ditch across it and then sell it to somebody the next year and then claim that I have a prescriptive easement on it. So the duration is that has got to be for a minimum of 10 years. In most cases, that's exactly what it is. Some of these are territorial in nature. And so that's the first test that you have to pass to be eligible for a prescriptive easement. Second, under Romanet 2, is it has to be continuously used and uninterrupted. So as long as you've utilized that ditch for a period of time and you haven't, quote, abandoned it for a decade, it's not defined what continuous and uninterrupted is. But historically, what the courts have ruled is as long as you are using that facility on some fairly regular interval, and it hasn't been interrupted for, like I said, maybe a decade or even 4 or 5 years, that would be eligible under a prescriptive easement. The next test is open and notorious. And the legal definition of open and notorious deals with is it has to be obvious to the landowner. It's open. This is not something that's obfuscated that they don't know what's going on their property. And notorious gets to that same issue if I can pull the definition out, Madam Chairman, I'll just give that to you. If I can find it here again. Because I think it's important as the committee that we understand the terminology that has been used for these prescriptive easements. Madam Chairman, here it is, open and notorious. It is obvious that the possession is taking place. It should have given the owner notice that the land is being used. It's hard to say that when there's a ditch out there and you're irrigating out of it and there's water flowing out of it 5 months out of the year. So that's basically what the courts have determined, open and notorious. It's an obvious possession taking place, and it should have given the owner notice that you're actually using that for that purpose. In this case, prescriptive easement would be for water conveyance mechanisms. Madam Chairman, and then we bring in the concept of adverse and the way the courts have historically looked at the use of the easement must be truly adverse to the rights of the original owner of the property through which the easement is sought and must be without the landowner's permission. In other words, this is nothing that's ever been granted. No landowner has ever said, I'm going to give you an easement to that property. So it's adverse to the possession. Those are the 3 litmus tests that must be, actually the 4, the 10-year time frame, continuous, uninterrupted, open and notorious, and it must be adverse. In other words, you haven't been granted that property right or that easement right to use that. So that's what the terminology of adverse. So you have to meet those 4 litmus tests, Madam Chairman. So then if we go to page 2 and we go through subsection B, there is a rebuttable presumption that an adverse easement is prescribed in this. So let me describe what a rebuttable presumption is. The presumption is that you have a prescribed easement, but it can be rebutted that in fact you don't. And this is the gateway back to the civil case if you want to contest that. So you, as the one that's going and claiming that you have a prescriptive easement, have got to prove that. It's rebuttable that you have that easement right. So if the person contests your prescriptive easement and they file a lawsuit, you're the one that has the duty of responsibility to prove, in fact, that you do have a prescriptive easement on the property. So that's what that does. The holder of the prescriptive easement under subsection E, water conveyance, is established. So what we're doing is we're establishing in subsection A that there is actually a prescriptive easement. Madam Chairman, if we go down to line 16, file notice describing the prescriptive easement with the requirements of the office of the county clerk. In other words, once you've established this prescriptive easement, it would be a really good idea at that point in time to actually go in and file that easement across that property. And then it's recorded on the title in perpetuity, then you no longer have a prescriptive easement. Well, I should say you would still have a prescriptive easement. This facilitates the ability to go ahead and put that easement on that property. Madam Chairman, Romanet 2, access, use, maintain, repair water conveyances located within the easements in accordance with law. Page 3, water conveyance means canal, ditch, drain ditch, pipeline, or other means of conveying water. Water user, this is just definitions. I'm not going to go through them. And then, Madam Chairman, we bring in subsection E, and this says the state engineer's office shall maintain and post to its website an informal document requiring legal aspects related to water conveyance easements. Madam Chairman, they already do that. That's what this is. This is the basis for a lot of the bill. So this is already on their website. Only thing we're saying is circumstances change. They just need to update this and maintain it on there. When we talk about maintain this just means it needs to be maintained on their website. So it's available to the public. Madam Chairman, that's the bill. I do have a proposed amendment. But if you'd like to discuss the bill before I bring the amendment on, what's your pleasure, Madam Chairman?
Senator Hicks, I think we'll let the committee ask any questions they might have so far, and then we'll go into the amendment. Committee, any questions for Senator Hicks? Senator Ide?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Hicks. I've got a little experience in the past with real estate adverse possession. This looks very similar with this prescriptive easement on water. The ingredients that you list here to claim that prescriptive easement are almost identical, I believe. I think adverse possession they refer to the word hostile in there too. But anyway, I notice on here, it says file a notice describing the prescriptive easement consistent with requirements to that statute. On a real estate situation, I know that if you want to contest it and you've filled all those ingredients in 10 years, you have to file a quiet title action to, actually get title to that piece of real estate if you're claiming adverse possession. So when you have on here file a notice describing the prescriptive easement, does that give the opposition, like you said, for the rebut to go against you, saying that they don't want to allow that prescriptive easement? That's where I'm not clear on how does it finally get decided on that prescriptive easement? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chairman, I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV, and I try not to play one here too. So I don't want to give legal advice. I'm not familiar with real estate law. Madam Chairman, at my own risk of saying something and have to retract it, I think to get a really appropriate answer, what I would ask is I can get that information for you, because I guess now that you mentioned that, I have that same question just a little bit. The way it's structured, you file it with the county court. I know that these cases typically go through the district courts, but it's a court case at that point in time. And again, it's incumbent upon you under the bill to go out there and prove that you have a prescriptive easement. It's not incumbent upon the person bringing suit because of the adverse nature of it. You have to prove. So, Madam Chairman, one of the reasons that when we work this bill and why I think it's very important is there is a cadre of Supreme Court cases. This has been litigated since the 1890s. And the trouble is right now is the only way to resolve this issue is to go to court. And what this does is it sets up, we took all of those Supreme Court cases and those district court cases and we said, look, because this is going to be used more and more, and quite frankly, I've always been a little bit adverse to creating job security for certain employment sectors within our economy. And so this is more than anything else, is to set out a framework for people can understand it. It's the law. It doesn't say you can't go to court. We put the burden on there. The amendment that I'll bring in a little later, it goes back to either law, Supreme Court cases, district court cases, tradition. And so we're just trying to put this in the green book. So you as a new landowner can go say, what is it when I go bury somebody's ditch? What's my recourse? And it's my land, my ditch, right? They can go to this, or they can go to the statute and say, here's the way it's lined out. This is the prescriptive easement. This is what happens. And the idea of this is what we're trying to do is ratchet down litigation and facilitate the ability to continue to irrigate around the state of Wyoming. So that's the purpose. But specific to Senator Ide's question, I would prefer that we consult with our legal staff so we've got an exact answer to that question.
Thank you. I don't know either on the prescriptive easement.
All right, thank you, Senator Ide. Any further questions from the committee for Senator Hicks? All right. So let's go ahead and go through your proposed amendment then, Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, I have to blame my colleague from Park County for this, because even through select water committees, he was pretty insistent that we have to define the limits of the prescriptive easement, and I think it was exactly right. So this is an attempt to do that, Madam Chairman. So what we're trying to do here is just bring in and say, what's the necessary width and how do you maintain your ditch without having to go through a court case again? You got a prescriptive easement, but what's the width of the easement? How wide is that? Again, this is designed to try to work within the limits of the court cases that we've seen, traditional practices. And so, Madam Chairman, this will deal with just the maintenance of those ditches and the width of those prescriptive easements. So maintenance is used in this section shall include the right of the holder of this prescriptive easement to temporarily remove infrastructure and or spanning a water conveyance system. It's not uncommon that somebody has a culvert or a bridge across your ditch, and this just says that in the case that you need to go in there and maintain that, you can temporarily remove that for the purpose of maintenance. It does put additional sideboards underneath that. Under subsection D, it says any temporary removal of a landowner's infrastructure for the purpose of water conveyance systems. Madam Chairman, I need to back up. So one of the really common examples that would be captured under A is not necessarily a culvert, it's a fence. Somebody has a fence across your ditch and you need to get your equipment down there to clean it. So in this case, you could go in there and temporarily remove that fence to get through there. So subsection A, before the temporary removal for the purpose of the infrastructure that a landowner that uses the infrastructure, and this is important, this is for ingress and egress. In other words, if I got to get to my house and I've got a culvert in your ditch, that's ingress and egress for the purpose underneath for the prescriptive easement. In a case like that, I think it's only reasonable that you provide that landowner notice that you're going to be temporarily removing that. That's what subsection A capital says. Shall provide reasonable written notice given the extent and estimate of time for the maintenance, but in no case shall notice be provided less than 48 hours before the temporary removal. So, and I know Senator French is familiar with this. Is not an uncommon occurrence to have somebody that's got a culvert or a bridge or something across a canal or a lateral or even a waste ditch that goes into their property, into their house. That's contemplated and covered under there. Provides the mechanism as to how to deal with that. B, temporary removal of a landowner's infrastructure shall be reasonable and minimize any burden on the landowner. I think that's fair and equitable. That's what we're trying to get to. Allows the maintenance, the removal, but make sure that it's reasonable. Madam Chairman, when we get into this, brings in the amendment on page 3 after line 10. This deals with the width of the prescriptive easement. Width of the prescriptive easement for water conveyance will be based on the size and volume of the water in the conveyance system. So what does that say? It says, if I've got a ditch that has a capacity to 2 CFS, I don't need a 330 cat excavator to go in there and clean that ditch. Now contrast that with the certain canals over in your neck of the wood, Chairman Steinmetz, that carry 1,500 CFS. Obviously, the size and the volume of water matters, and that's what that contemplates. Again, must meet the reasonable standard. Be reasonable with sufficient to utilize equipment suitable for the operation and maintenance of the conveyance system. In other words, if it takes large equipment, giant Caterpillar excavator, that will be the width of the easement. If it only takes a little John Deere 4210 with the V ditcher on it, that's the width of prescription of the easement. Now, it does call out some exceptions. It says that the easement for the prescriptive easement will be from the center line of the conveyance system, but may vary from each side of the center line to necessarily facilitate the size of the equipment, placement of the dredge material, and the topography that the conveyance system traverses. So what we're trying to accomplish there is oftentimes you may have a certain area on one side of the ditch that you need that 14-foot width to get an excavator down, but you may stack your spoil on the other side of the ditch and you only need 6 feet. So it's center line, but it doesn't have to be. And again, what we're trying to do is minimize the width of that prescriptive easement to facilitate the necessary and proper maintenance of that canal, but not over-prescribe that. So if we just did 30 feet on either side of the center line, you've got an easement now on somebody's property and you don't even need it. And so that's what we're talking about. It may vary from center line to center line based on the necessary ability to facilitate that. And also topography makes a big difference. In my neck of the woods, we have a lot of canals on very steep hillsides. And sometimes just to maintain the slope on those so the canal is not caving off, the bluff is not caving off, you have to pull that back. It may be back 40 or 50 feet on that side to maintain that ditch. Under that scenario where you have a very steep slope or a bluff, you may have to. That's contemplated in that topography component there for the prescriptive easement. Madam Chairman, that's the amendment.
All right, thank you, Senator Hicks. Would you like to entertain a question on the amendment right now, or wait until we see if we move it? Does anybody have any questions? All right, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Hicks, Majority Floor Leader Hicks. Just a general question here on page 1, line 31. Would there be any advantage to inserting the word safe into the safe operation and maintenance? Just as a point of clarity for the operation of said equipment, so you could further define that word. Just wonder what your opinion is on that.
Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, I hope none of my family members that farm or some of my constituents are listening, but some of them are not that safe, Senator Kolb. I think it's a vague terminology. I don't know what it does, if anything. I think it could bring up potential controversy because your definition of safe and my definition of safe may be two different things. And so I would be a little concerned about broadening it out to provide an opportunity for somebody to contest whether you were safely operating your equipment while doing the maintenance on a prescriptive easement. So I don't know that it's necessary, but I think it brings in a level of vagueness that we may not want in there.
All right. Okay, committee. All right. Thank you, Senator Hicks. Do we have anyone from the State Engineer's Office that would like to speak on this bill?
Madam Chairman, if you guys are done roughing me up, can I come back up?
Yes, you may. We can probably still rough you up even if you're up here.
You get the hot seat.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brandon Gebhardt, State Engineer. Madam Chair, I appreciate the opportunity. We testified on this bill in front of Select Water Committee. Many of our comments, if not all of them, were accepted, so I appreciate that. I did have just one lingering question to the bill as it pertains to the State Engineer's Office. On line 12 of page 3, the word maintain. The legal aspects of easements is outside the area of expertise of the SEO. And for us to upgrade and or maintain the contents of that document is concerning to me from our agency's perspective. As far as housing it on the website, we already do that. That's not an issue. My only concern was with the maintenance of the document itself.
Thank you. And I know we talked about that, and we'll let the good Senator Hicks think about that a little bit, unless he's got an answer for that now.
Madam Chairman, State Engineer Gebhardt, you know what the intent is. It's just to make sure that people have access to this document, because I think this in concert with this will really significantly reduce litigation around the state of Wyoming over these that can really protract for a long time. And so this is really what we're trying to get to. So if you could provide some language that you would like to see that just says you shall maintain this document available to the public on your website. That's what we're trying to get to.
Could I jump right in there for just a minute, Mr. State Engineer and Senator Hicks? Would shall post work, or do you need the word maintain in there?
I just think that as long as we want people to know that this document is available on the state engineer's website. So the terminology, I'm not married to one way or another. So if it's just shall post or shall make available on the website, whatever that language you might suggest, Madam Chairman, would be fine with me.
All right, well, let's think about that before we work the bill, but what would your response to that be if we just take maintain and out?
Madam Chair, that would resolve my concern if maintain was out. It's just the updating of it that concerns me.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for the state engineer from the committee? No questions, you got off easy. All right. All right, is there anyone else who'd like to testify on this bill? Come on down. Senator Larson. Thank you for attending. Love to hear your testimony.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, thank you. I sat in on this on Select Water. I'm very excited that it's coming forward. Being a ex-manager of a big canal company, this is a big topic on all the time, especially when we're dividing land into subdivisions and such where the new owners don't understand ditches going through their property and such. And there's a big difference when you have the larger canal companies that are still, a lot of them are still owned by the US government. And their easements are a little bit easier to maintain. Not that the government helps you with that. And then working as a hydrographer, I run into this quite often on small ditches. So we need to get something out there. And I think getting it on the statutes is very important because you always say, refer to the state engineer's webpage to find that document that describes what has happened in the past in the courts. Kind of worried, I haven't seen the amendment. It kind of concerns me maybe that we're actually, I don't know, trying to describe it. Hopefully we left it open wide enough that that we won't be running into issues. But I'll read through it. I haven't, but I hope we pass something. This is vital. So I encourage an aye vote. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Larson. We appreciate you being here.
Okay.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator Larson? I should have asked you that before I let you leave. Seeing none, you're good to go. Thank you. We got you there. All right.
Chairman Steinmetz Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau. I appreciate this bill. I know this has been a problem. Sometimes easements are tricky. I mean, sometimes they just don't move with the paperwork when property is transferred. Sometimes you don't find that out until 2 or 3 owners down the road. I know this. It's happened with a lot of different easements. I think I appreciate the amendments. I do like that about the maintenance in there. So many times that's not included. And then, well, you can have the ditch, but you can't do anything with it. I do have, and I don't, perhaps I'm seeing black helicopters that I've been known to see before. Do we need to tighten up that definition? I don't know. That's a question, because sometimes when you have it vague, as wide as it needs to be, could that potentially invite litigation that, well, Brett, you did it too wide. You don't need it to be that wide. But sometimes we can't account for every potential situation. So another question to the committee: what will be the mechanism when these prescriptive easements do we need to outline when these prescriptive easements are established, how that information gets to the state engineer's office? I mean, I'm assuming that would not be I don't know how that would happen. Do we need to put that in, that when these are established, that information is sent to the state engineer's office? I don't know. That's just a question that pops in my mind. Perhaps it's not needed, perhaps it is. But appreciating the bill, appreciating the amendments with some, perhaps, well, with some questions. With that, Chairman Steinmetz committee, I'd sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Questions? All right, Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, when you said the definition too broad, did you mean the definition of water conveyance system?
Well, yes, and having not seen the amendment, but if I understood it correctly, Chairman, Majority Floor Leader, that it depends on what type of ditch it is. Thank you, ma'am. So it'll be variable if it's a wide canal or if it's just a 1 CFS or 2 CFS ditch, those extremes. And then it needs to be as wide as what it needs to be. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I have concerns that is it too nebulous? Is it too vague? Does it invite litigation? I would hope not, but as they say, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting in Wyoming. So perhaps, again, I am just seeing a black helicopter, but if it is a fact hovering, maybe we can deal with it now and resolve not have the future problems.
Madam Chairman, I
Senator
can
Hicks.
probably address that. So when I tried to come up with this language, and I worked with Senator French, and we tried to find a prescriptive width, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 foot. What is that? And what you come at is you can't define that because of the nature. And what our legal staff went back and researched, and they said, because the nature of every one of these court cases is specific, 2 CFS versus 200 CFS. It's very specific. And so their court would not grant you this giant easement that would normally take. And so this was trying to provide guidance. This document is not to prescribe an absolute width. It provides guidance for what that appropriate width of that easement should be to get away too much of takings, because it's a private property right that we're talking about. You're putting an easement across somebody's property and you're going to be able to use that. So if we go over prescriptive and say it's 30 feet from the center line and you got that little ditch, you probably only need 15 feet, right? Versus the canal. And so the trouble that I was having with the Senator French was trying to, what is that number? So I went back to the court cases and looked at what they determined, looked at what LSO had researched, and they said each one of them is a determination. Each case had its own special facts. What we've tried to do is incorporate that in there. Each one of these prescriptive easements is only going to have its own special cases. Slope, topography, all of that stuff will come into play as to what's reasonable for the width of that easement. So that's what I tried to capture.
Chairman, Senator, I truly appreciate that. I understand where you're coming from. I'm hoping that it works. And I realize, having dealt with many, similar types of issues throughout, different things, that nothing works all the time. I hope this works. It should work, but it will depend on the 2 personalities or 6 personalities or whatever involved. So thank you, sir.
Mr. Moline, and I would just encourage you, if this bill does pass out of committee, now we've given you the amendment, so you know where to find us if you have some suggestions or ideas.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
Chairman Steinmetz. Any further questions? I do appreciate this bill. Thank you for the
All right,
committee
all
for
right.
bringing it forward.
All
Thank you.
right, thank you very much. All right. I did want to acknowledge the good Treasurer Meyer that stepped into the room. Welcome to the Senate Ag Committee, Treasurer Meyer. Yes, absolutely. Come on up. Depends on, yeah.
Is an irritator.
Just kind of a question. I've got the amendment here. This question might be answered in the bill. If it is, I apologize. Looking at the form that's going to be recorded with the state engineers for presence on his website, are we going to have to, I guess we're going to have to survey that so everybody knows where it's at. Is that a correct assumption?
Senator Hicks, can you answer that question?
I can figure out, first I have to figure out how to work the microphone to be able to answer the question. You know, I am a senator, and it didn't come with directions. And we're known to be slow and methodical, so give me some time. Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the document that they currently maintain, and this is really what we're only referencing. And this has been kind of the standard when the hydrographers run into an issue, or the courts, and so they go to there, and it's got a list of it's actually one of the best things I've seen put out, because it goes through there and says, it'll ask the question, it says, where in water statutes can I find out the law in regard to ditch easements and right-of-ways? It asks that question. The answer is, there is no water statutes referencing ditch easements.
Yeah.
But this is what we're talking about. So there's really no form, and I forgot to address it with the previous witness on there. The state engineer's office does not record easements on ditches. There's no database. That's your county clerks on those titles. And so there will be no additional forms that you fill out with the state engineer's office at all. So there's really no role for the state engineer's office in this bill, other than just to say, you guys need to keep this on your website as a reference document. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what the bill does.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, I was just trying to figure out what would be a standard if I wanted to, I guess, if I'm going to record an easement with the county, it probably at that time you'd have to have some kind of survey information, and that's ultimately within 10 years, that's where you want to go. But before that, just to make sure that everybody knew I had an easement, would you just necessarily say for the means of conveying water from point A to point B and have some reference from the big cotton tree to the old railroad car?
Madam Chairman, typically, and with anytime you record an easement on the title of a piece of property, there's a survey involved.
Yeah.
And it'll,
well,
usually they give a center line and they'll describe it. In this case, it's a bearing, whatever that bearing is, 500 feet, it's 22 feet wide. And then because of the slope, it goes out to 42 feet for 500 feet and then comes back down. So it could be, that easement would be based on what you, as the person that's pursuing the prescriptive easement, makes a determination as to what you need to do the maintenance on that ditch.
Yeah.
Now, if the landowner disagrees with what you're filing, it's a presentable assumption that they can take you to court and you're going to have to prove that you need that width. This just sets out, I think, tries to set out the sideboards of what's eligible under a prescriptive easement.
Yeah, and I applaud you guys for taking this up, because it's been too long without anything on the books to give you any guidance. I'm just wanting to know as a water user, you know, just to make sure that when I do this, exactly what I'm going to have. And another question that kind of brings that up, we talk about the water conveyance shall be based on the size and volume of water. So I'm assuming that it doesn't make any difference whether it's a pipeline, a line ditch, or a dirt ditch. You're really looking at the size and volume of water. And from time to time, people will add water to the conveyance system through some other means. And at that time, then that easement that was originally based on maybe 9 cubic foot per second is now 15 cubic foot per second, and you need a little bit different size of ditch. So would that be, I guess, without having to abandon the original easement and then try to do enlargement in the prescription easement, you can, I guess, be settled that an easement for conveyance of water by any means is appropriate.
Senator Hicks?
Madam Chairman, the way that I would interpret that, the courts may interpret it a little different, but it's, so number one, if you enlarge the ditch, which I've done a lot of those over the years, and you put more water in the same ditch, at that point in time, you've got an easement on that already through a prescriptive easement, and say you did the survey, filed that with the county clerk's office. At that point in time, you'd have to make a determination as to what, if that easement was insufficient for your ability to do the maintenance on a little larger ditch.
Okay. So as long as you can stay within the sidelines of
has
that
nothing
easement,
to-
you're
yeah.
good to go no matter how you put the water through it.
Which, in the case we deal a lot of times is you take a dirt ditch and you bury it, and it's actually a smaller footprint, but the easement doesn't change because it's still the same volume or even a larger volume there.
Well, with that understanding, by golly, I wish you guys the best of luck and full steam ahead.
Thank you, Treasurer
Mr.
Meyer.
Chairman.
Thanks for being here.
Senator
Any
Hicks.
questions for Treasurer Meyer? He seems to have asked a few, but do you have any questions of him?
Probably
All
not.
right, seeing
Okay.
none, we'll let you go. Thank you. All right. Come on up.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, my name is Kelly Little. I am representing the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. The hour grows late, so I'll be brief. The WACD supports this bill. We appreciate the clarity it brings to the requirements and the process for those easement owners to claim the easement, and we appreciate the effort to protect the traditional water users of Wyoming. And with that, I would stand for questions.
All right, any questions for Ms. Little? All right,
All right,
thank you.
thank you.
All right, thanks for being here. All right. Any other public comment? Public comment in the room? I don't see any online. No public comment on Zoom. So committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Kolb, seconded by Ide. And we'll go through and we'll go do amendments and then we'll do discussion. Are there any amendments on the bill? Senator Kolb.
Page 3, line 12, insert between shall and maintain, so the word electronically.
Okay, is there a second on that?
Mr., could you restate the amendment, please?
Page 3, line 12. After shall, insert electronically.
Senator Kolb, would you turn on your microphone and do that again?
Oh, sorry.
So that everyone can hear you.
Well, I'll restate that again. Page 3, line 12. After the word shall, insert electronically.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Hicks, moved by Kolb. All those in favor, discussion on the amendment. Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Somebody mentioned to remove maintain, I think of state engineer, maybe, the words maintain and.
Senator Kolb, would you consider that a friendly amendment to,
Discussion on that question. So electronically, it is backed up with the state. They'll have backup. So it would be electronically maintained. I thought to get to the point that we wanted to have some sort of surety that there's going to be a record and that it would be available and maintained electronically on site. So that's the reason why I offered that amendment for electronically maintained.
okay. So Senator Kolb, what I heard the state engineer say, and we might bring him back up just for our discussion, was he thought that maintain created some legal issues for so let's hear his rationale again, and then we'll decide if you think it's a friendly amendment to just make it electronically post, or whether you want to leave maintain in. So go ahead, Mr. State Engineer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Kolb, when I looked at the word maintain, I took that to mean that that document would be updated periodically. The contents of the document would be updated periodically. And that's where the concern of area of expertise came to mind. So it's the maintenance of a document, as in updating it and keeping it current as things may change. Because that's not within our expertise, essentially. So we do have a document. If the intent is to keep the document that we have currently online, we'll certainly do that. But if that needs to be changed, that should probably be somebody other than the state engineer's office that changes or manipulates the wording in that document. Am I making any sense to you?
Senator Kolb.
No. Frankly, the reason why I thought that word would fit and is to be clear about it is once there's data that you have, a document, right? You would post said information on your website. All it says, all I believe it says is electronically maintain. It just means an assurance that through your servers, which I'm assuming you're better than the counties are, you have backup. And it would maintain said document. There was no thought that you would have to, I don't know, do anything more than have the current posted document up, whatever that may be. That is all. Not about, I thought it would help out with the assurance of you folks maybe saying, well, you have to have paper documents, or you'd have to have something other than an electronic posting of the data. That was the reason. I mean, if you don't think it helps, sir, I'm happy to. You're obviously the one interfacing with this. I'm listening to what you have to say.
Go right ahead and answer.
Thank you,
if
Madam
would.
Chair. If the committee would so entertain, shall post an electronic version to its website and remove the maintain, and I think that would clear up the confusion that I'm hearing.
Okay,
Madam Chairman.
Friendly amendment, Madam Chair.
that is a friendly amendment. Do we have any further discussion on the friendly amendment?
I'm just wondering how you post a paper copy to your website.
Well,
Yeah, and I'm just, and
Okay.
it's my training as a scientific and technical writer to take out as many verbs and just very short and concise, and shall post to its website. I don't know a website that isn't electronic.
Right, that's where I was going.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
It's, the language is fine. It's just, I don't think necessary. It does the same thing. So,
Senator
Senator
Cole,
Curl, would you agree with that or not?
would you agree with that, or what would you like
I'm
to
not
do
willing
with
to
your
die on that
amendment?
hill, so I will withdraw the amendment.
Thank you,
Is
Senator
that-
Kolb. Senator Kolb, would you like to at least take out maintain and then, and that would leave shall post?
Well, Senator Cole will leave it alone at this point because I'll just leave it alone.
Okay, you can leave it alone.
I'll make the motion that we strike the words maintain and out of line 12.
Okay,
It would read shall post to its website after we remove that.
okay. Linda, did you get that?
Yes, ma'am, the state engineer's office shall post to his website and
All right.
We have a
And
second
is
on
there
the
a
motion.
second on the motion?
Second.
It's been moved by Senator Ide, seconded by Senator French. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The motion has passed. Are there any further amendments on the bill? Further amendments? I know we had one proposed with the presentation of the bill. Would anyone like to move that amendment?
I'll move this amendment, yes.
Would you turn on your microphone?
Madam Chairman, I would move the amendment.
Okay, so Senator French has moved the proposed amendment that Senator Hicks described in his description. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Moved by French, seconded by Hicks. A discussion on the amendment.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Senator French.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I think that's something that's necessary, doing our best. Senator Hicks I feel, has done a good job in trying to get this to where you can clean your ditch. I mean, in the spring runoff, man, those ditches are collecting a lot of silt in those ditches. And when it hits a culvert, it fills the culvert up too. So he's addressed that in the B. So I feel it's a good amendment.
Okay, thank you. All right, further discussion, seeing none, all those in favor of the proposed amendment, and Linda has a copy of it, correct, Linda? All right, so we're good to go. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment has been adopted. So with that committee, we will entertain discussion. Seeing none, we'll take roll call on the bill.
Senator Friend,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Aye.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator Cole,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Aye.
Madam Chairman, we have 5 ayes.
All right, we have 5 ayes, and Senator Hicks will manage this bill on the floor. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 96, Omnibus Water Bill Planning and Administration, and Interim Director Mead will present the bill to us. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Jason Mead with the Wyoming Water Development Office. You should have a 3-ring binder in front of you, and I'll just go through the layout of that real quick. So if you turn out of the first page, we have a summary sheet of the bill that has all the projects within the bill. Right after that blue summary sheet is an actual copy of the bill. It's 14 pages and has 11 different unique sections. Under tab A in the notebook is just a brief description of our water development program if you're interested in looking at that. Under tab B, we have each account balance, account 1, 2, and 3 account balances. And this is the account balances before the projects in the bill would be appropriated.
Would you go over those account balances with us, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So Madam Chairman, account balance for account 1 is $26,270,953. And this is for new development projects. The balance in account 2 is $3,905,680, and this is account 2 rehabilitation. And in account 3, the balance for appropriation is $7,210,336.
Thank you.
If you move on to tab C, this is where we get into individual project recommendations that the Water Development Commission and the Select Water Committee have all reviewed. And throughout the remainder of the 3-ring binder, those are all recommendations for each project. So I then point your attention back to the blue summary sheet within the front cover and kind of walk you through that real quick. So the first column, as you see, is labeled tab. So if you have any questions or want additional information on any of these projects, you would just simply turn to that tab letter and find the information on that particular project. The second column is the bill page. So same thing. If you need to find it in the bill, you'd know which page to look for in the bill. Then we have the project name, followed by in the fourth column, the location, which county it's located in. And as you see, as you continue to the right, which water development account the funding would be appropriated from, and then just a general description in the far right column. So as you know, and the Select Water Committee members can probably attest to, the projects within this bill have been thoroughly vetted. That started with the applications from sponsors. We are a sponsor-driven program. So we get applications from different special districts, irrigation districts, municipalities, so on and so forth. We received those in March. We then assigned those to Water Development Office project managers who went out, worked with those individual sponsors to understand what their issues were and concerns, how that would fit into our program. And then from that, we were able to put recommendations together that we took in front of the Water Development Commission and the Select Water Committee, both at the May meeting and then again at the November meeting when it was compared against all the construction project applications, which you'll see that bill here in a week or so when it comes back over from House. During that time frame, after the May recommendations and approval of those recommendations by the Commission and the Select Water Committee, we went through a competitive consultant selection process where we sent out advertisements for the individual projects. We received statements of qualifications and letters of interest from individual consulting firms to do that work. We then shortlist those firms and then put together requests for proposals, which would be the actual scope of work for each one of these projects. Send it out to that shortlisted consulting group, and then we form a selection team for each one of these projects, which consists of Water Development Commission members, staff from the Water Development Office, the sponsor themselves, and then sometimes we have technical advisors such as somebody from the State Engineer's Office. So they go through, we give some time once the consultants have those RFPs, requests for proposals, to put together their proposals. We then review those as interview committees and rank them independently. And then from that, we have a short list that we would actually interview where they verbally tell us how they're going to approach the project, allow us to ask questions. So everybody's on the same page on which consulting firm would be the best to complete that individual project. And they come to a determination, and that's taken back in front of the Commission and the Select Water Committee, the Commission, to determine which consulting firm and the cost for that particular project to go under contract with. So those numbers or those budgets are then hardwired into our recommendations from May and then reconsidered at our November meeting, as I mentioned, by the Commission and the Select Water Committee. Once approved there, then they go in front of both committees, the Commission and the committee, independently, either at the December or January meeting, depending if it's a general session or a budget session. So this year it was a December meeting. So with that, for the sake of time and at the request of Chairman Steinmetz, we'll probably go through the bill utilizing the summary sheet, the blue sheet. So I'll work my way down through that. Feel free to interrupt me at any point and ask any questions you might have. So the first section of projects would be our level 1 reconnaissance projects under new development. We have 6 master plans, and a master plan is really just a holistic look at a system, whether it be a municipal system, city, town, or an agricultural irrigation system. And what we're looking for are the deficiencies, what needs to be, putting together a priority list for that particular sponsor to be able to keep that system modernized, and in the case of municipalities, to account for future population growth and et cetera. We also have our UW Water Research Program funding in that first section. So with the 6 projects in the UW Water Research Program, that total comes to $1,596,820. Under the second section of the bill, also under Account 1 New Development, are Level 2 feasibility studies. These typically would be municipal type projects. We have 2 projects there for a total of $1,795,000. In Section 3 of the bill, we get into our Account 2 rehabilitation account. So we're looking at projects that are 15 years and older. A lot of times this deals with agricultural projects, but we do have some municipal projects that come into this program as well. With that, we have 4 different projects. Again, they're master plans, this time for the irrigation districts and other special districts, for the total of $960,000. Section 4 are Level 2 studies, feasibility studies in that same account, rehabilitation account 2. We have 5 projects in this section, which equate to $1,633,000. I'm going to skip over just a second on the Section 5 and move on to Section 6 and 7. So we have a couple of amendments. One is in Level 2, or a Level 2 amendment for the Douglas Test Well. This is both an amendment for a time extension as well as additional funding. And then in Section 7, we have an amendment for the Nowood River Storage Alkali Creek Level 2 Phase 2 project, which is for the design and permitting for that particular project. And we're also asking for additional time and additional funding for that project. With that, I would ask if there are any questions about additional projects, and I'd also ask Chairman Steinmetz if the Select Water Committee Chairman, who has left, would like to cover some of the amendments associated with the bill that came out of the Select Water Committee, or if you'd like me to handle those.
Yes, I was just thinking it might be nice to talk about the additional funding and the need for the additional funding.
Okay.
If you could explain that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chairman, under Section 5, you see the Green River Little Snake River Basins Conveyance Loss Study. This was an amendment brought by the Select Water Committee at our December meeting with the thought, with all the action going on within the Colorado River Basin, that it would be a good idea for us to have a good understanding of what the consumptive uses are associated with the conveyance or ditches throughout our irrigation systems in the Colorado River. And what that would do would be, it would help inform the state engineer if we were ever under a Colorado River Compact curtailment in regulating off ditches to meet our requirements, downstream requirements.
Could I
It would
interrupt
also-
you for just one moment?
Yep.
Okay, committee, so on your tabs on the side, if you want to go to tab T, that will describe the project description. Am I in the right spot there?
Yes.
And so if you want to look at that, you have a description of exactly what that $500,000 is for the Green River Little Snake Basin conveyance. And so if you want to follow along in that section, we'll just make sure to call those out if you would when we
Sure.
get to those changes. Thank you.
Yep. So, Madam Chairman, that would also inform potential conservation programs and projects that might come out of funding in the Colorado River through the federal government. And so I'd ask if there are any questions on that particular conveyance loss study. And that $500,000 in Section 5 is appropriated from Account 1, but in Section 8, you'll see where there's actually an appropriation from the general fund to Account 1 to compensate for that project in our account. Okay. The next one would be under Section 8, and this would, well, we just covered that, sorry. Under Section 9, this would be under tab W, if you want a description. And also at our December Select Water Committee meeting, an amendment was brought to remove the Board of Control funding from Account 1. Historically, Board of Control, which are our superintendents, hydrographers in each water division, has been funded through the general fund. And there have been a number of, 2 times, both from the early 90s to the early 2000s, and then again in the last 5 years or so, where funding has been taken from Account 1 instead of the general fund to fund the Board of Control. And that was more or less, from my understanding, a budget balancing approach when revenues were not as good as they are now in the past. So I think the Select Water Committee's intent would be to remove that in fiscal year 24. So we're in fiscal year 23 currently. So starting July 1 of 23 through June 30 of 24, that funding would be removed from our budget or from Account 1. And then thereon forwards, that would be funded through the general fund. And then going forward in future fiscal bienniums, it would also be funded through the general fund. That amounts to a little over $7 million a year. So that funding would then be able to be utilized to put additional water development projects on the ground.
Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. 7 million a year or biennium?
A year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions before we proceed? Seeing none, go right ahead.
Okay. Madam Chairman, the last section, Section 10, deals with, again, the Upper Colorado River. And through the the Inflation Reduction Act, there has been some funding submitted through the Bureau of Reclamation for the Colorado River, and as well as through other programs through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, not only for the Colorado River, but other basins throughout the nation. And to really be a conduit for that federal funding, the Select Water Committee would like to set up a full-time employee position within our office to be the Upper Colorado River Basin Project Coordinator. And what that position would really do would be to keep track of what federal funding is available and for the Upper Colorado River Basins, in particular Wyoming, and then also work with local units of government and NGOs to develop funding partnerships and work with them to actually implement some of these projects, and then provide the capacity to really meet the requirements associated with the federal funding or the federal reporting that may be required through those different funding programs through the federal government. And then associated with that would be an additional, so that would be $125,000, and that would be for fiscal year '24. And then in the future, that would be expected to be part of the Wyoming Water Development Office standard budget in future fiscal bienniums. And then in addition to that, the Select Water Committee amended in $500,000 from the general fund, and this would be one-time funding to provide project consultant support for that same program or same position. Because oftentimes when we see federal programs set up, they have some requirements either for eligibility or just requirements to apply, and to have some funding that we could contract with consultants and utilize a bigger group of professional disciplines would be beneficial, because we don't have a lot of all the disciplines we might needed to put together feasibility reports that may be required from the federal government to complete those applications and reporting requirements. So with that, I would ask if there's any questions.
All right, committee, any questions for the director? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, first time I've seen this, so I just had a question on page 12, line 17, under well drillers licensing. And it's got on the total appropriation of $251,000. I guess my question is exactly, is that for, are we paying for I mean, I don't know what that expenditure is for. Is it revenue for well drillers, or is it says well driller licensing to licensing? So are we paying for licensing? I guess, could you tell me what that represents?
Mr. Chairman, so what we're looking at here is the state engineer or the Board of Control, state engineer's budget for the Board of Control. So I would ask if the state engineer might answer that question or be able to answer that question, because this is not the water development budget that we're looking at here. So I don't know for sure.
All right, come on down.
Put you on the spot, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brandon Gebhardt, State Engineer. I apologize, but I did not hear the question completely. Could you please ask that again?
Certainly. It's under page 12, line 17, and well drillers licensing, and there's an allotment of about $250,000, $251,160.
Madam Chair, Senator Kolb, the Well Drillers Licensing Board is actually a division under the State Engineer's Office. And so it's kind of a quasi entity under the State Engineer's Office, and that just provides the budget amount for that, and that is a special revenue funded agency under the purview of the State Engineer's Office.
Thank you. So board is the key part I was missing. Thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator
So
Hicks.
whenever you see these different S's or these numbers over there, that designates, this is just the appropriation side, but that designates the funds that they come out of. And you're going to see SR in any fund that charges fees. So think state parks, you're going to see special revenues. So when you see that, that's usually a special revenue that's derived from some type of user fee. In this case, it's a license fee. So that's where that, just SR stands for, special revenue.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. And Senator Kolb, that was a really good question, because we don't have a key of what those codes mean here. So there would be no way that I see in this bill for us to find that out unless we ask the question. So thank you for that. All right, are there any other questions? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You made a quick mention of the Inflation Reduction Act that you received funds from. And if I understood that right, can you elaborate that on a little bit more on that? How much were those funds? Where are they directed to go? You talked about this position for $125,000 that was maybe connected to those Inflation Reduction Act funds, and how that will carry forward once those funds are gone. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, just as a technical point, we should refer to it, the official name of the act, which is the Fraudulent Inflation Reduction Act.
All right. All right. Go ahead and I think, which page of the bill are you referring to, Senator Ide?
Section 10 on page 13.
Page 13,
Yeah.
section 10. And so do we have an answer on that one?
Sorry, Madam Chairman.
No, that's all right.
So I believe there's roughly $4 billion for the Colorado River Basin in the Inflation Reduction Act. Just to be clear, none of that has been appropriated to or sent directly to the state of Wyoming. I think there's a system conservation program that they have an additional, well, not additional, as part of that, I think is $125 million. And so that would be potentially available for not only voluntary conservation now, but into the future conservation projects. So the position really just is to keep track of not only the Inflation Reduction Act funding that potentially could be available to the state of Wyoming in the upper Colorado River Basin part of the state of Wyoming, as well as any other federal funding that could go to help in our portion of the upper Colorado River to implement efficiency and conservation, water conservation projects within that basin.
All right. All right. Any further questions? Seeing none, is there anybody, do we need to hear anything from the state engineer's office, or do you have any comments on the budgetary issue that we dealt with regarding your office?
No, Madam Chair, I'm fine with it. I would just point out, and I don't know how to handle it. On page 12, line 7, the administration portion of our budget, there is a small amount that of our administration budget, our Division 100 series budget, that is in Water One. And I didn't know if it was the appetite of the Select Water at the time to remove that as well or not, but.
Madam Chairman.
Senator Hicks?
Brandon, do you know what that 49,000, that 50,000 is used for within your budget?
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, I'm not real clear on what it was, but it had something to do with an adjustment in the budget, and it was to fund portions of the administration budget for their work in the Board of Control. So a portion of the time spent from the administration of the Board of Control, that funding was
It's the
set over.
administrative support function that the state
That is
engineer's
correct.
office supplies to the.
That
Board
is
of
correct.
Control. Yeah, I think it was always the intent to move that onto the general fund and get off of account one. That's what was the purpose of the amendment. So, Madam Chairman, when we work the bill,
Okay.
I'll address that at
All
that
right.
time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman of the Select Water Committee. All right, is there, Director Mead?
Mr. Chairman, just to add on to that real briefly, so you have good knowledge of what that $49,906 is, because I believe that's fiscal year 23 and 24, so there's 2 years of budget there. So if you wanted to just remove the fiscal year 24 like you are for the Board of Control, you'd have that number. And then just a friendly suggestion under, I call those the note number 2. It does say that it is the intent of the legislature that funds appropriated to the state engineer for the Board of Control Division shall be made from the general fund in the 2025-26 fiscal biennium and any subsequent fiscal biennium. I'd leave this up to you, but I don't know if there would need to be anything inserted where it says state engineer for the administration and Board of Control Division, perhaps, so that intent gets carried forward into future fiscal bienniums.
Okay, I'm gonna make sure that Linda knows where we're working out of, so that when we get to the point where we might make an amendment, we were on page 12, was that clear? All right, okay, so we'll probably, yes, and then I'm not sure where we'll insert that, but also line 7 was where the dollar amount was, so when we get to that point, you'll know what we're talking about, all right? Okay, thank you. Yes, go right ahead, Mr. Gephardt.
And Madam Chair, I did do the math as I was sitting in the audience,
All
if that
right.
would help.
That would help. So go ahead and give us the math.
All right, so line 7, if you were to remove half of the biennium budget under other general, the S1 funds, so you would essentially strike the 49,906, and under that, it would be 24,953.
Okay,
And then if you added that to the general fund portion, that total would be, rather than 1,796,136, that number would be 1,821,089.
okay. And what line was that on?
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
those were both on line 7. So
Line
the first
7.
number after administration, rather than 1,796,136, that would become 1,821,089.
okay,
And then
Got
the
that.
second number would be stricken and replaced with 24,953.
all right. Thank you for that.
And then at the bottom on line 19, the 18,294 number would become 18,319,296. And the $8,534.89 would become $8,509,136.
$8,509,136, correct?
8,509,136.
All right, thank you for that. All right.
And I would hope somebody would check my math eventually on this, but that's what I came up with.
I believe we will. So, and if it's a little different, that would be a technical correction, likely. So, all right, are there any other questions? Any other, Senator Ide?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on that question I had on section 10, page 13. So this is adding another employee, essentially, if I understand it right. And I'm just curious of who's managing the Colorado River project right now and why you need an extra employee. I understand it's kind of the hot button on Colorado River, but can you explain that a little more? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, so we have a number of project managers within the office, and we divvy up duties as necessary. So it's a team effort amongst throughout the state and the issues that come up throughout the state. But as you mentioned, I think this is a unique issue, has a lot of consequences. So a little extra attention probably would be a good thing.
Madam Chairman, I can help out. Part of the discussion with Select Water too is some of these federal funds are reimbursable for staff positions and time and infrastructure. So I would anticipate once we get this project coordinator up or running and stuff, that a significant portion of this could be recouped through some federal dollars. From familiar with a number of the programs that are available out there, and it's just an opportunity to hopefully take this, leverage this into millions of dollars of infrastructure on farms and ranches in the Colorado River Basin, and then hopefully recoup some of the costs back associated with doing that. And I think that was discussions we had at Select Water for this position. It's a new position, so we'll see. But that's certainly the intent of the Select Water Committee when they sponsored this, is to try to bring as many of those on-farm type of conservation dollars in through the program as possible, and then seek reimbursement for that. So hopefully within a year or two that you see there'll be another code there, FF federal funds.
Okay.
Anyway, Madam Chairman, I had one more question regarding account 1 expenditures on line 14 for Interstate Streams Division. Has that been a historic expenditure, or is again that part of the administrative cost that the state engineer's office provides to the Interstate Streams Division? So page 12 on the, it's on your budget, Mr. State Engineer, and so when you look at line 14, or excuse me, track that across, 14, it shows $103,000 that are coming out of account 1.
Madam Chair and Senator Hicks, I believe that appropriation, and David can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that appropriation was taken out of Water 1 when the endangered fish program under the Colorado River was established. I believe it's been in that account.
That's what that funds is for.
I believe that's
It's
correct.
been an ongoing expense for the recovery program.
That's correct.
Our contribution. All right, thank you.
All right. Any further questions? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just a kind of a general question here. What's in it for industry and municipalities? I mean, we haven't talked about, I haven't even heard mention of this on trying to protect the water situation on the Colorado to the Green River. What are we doing something? I mean, maybe it just didn't get mentioned to help those situations.
Madam Chair, Senator Kolb, absolutely. A majority of my time, I sit as the governor's representative and Wyoming's commissioner on the Colorado River Commission, Upper Colorado River Commission, and in negotiations with 7 basin states. And that's my primary function, is to protect Wyoming's water uses. Understanding that Wyoming has obligations under these compacts as well. But the main focus is to protect Wyoming's water users and water uses while maintaining our contract and compact obligations. So there's a lot of work going on right now, fast and furious. And we've got a lot of my staff dedicated just to the Colorado River right now and all the events that are occurring right now. Does that answer your question at all, or?
I appreciate your efforts. I know it's a challenge. I'm very familiar with the challenges on the upper Colorado, or the upper Green, or the Colorado River Water Compact. And I just wanted to hear something that we're doing something positive for industry and, municipalities.
Okay, I apologize. I didn't hear that part of the question, Madam Chair. Absolutely. We're meeting with them, and as part of our work group, representative, both those industries or water use sectors are part of our working group. And we're meeting with them frequently, trying to use our existing tools to help them secure their water sources. We're working with several entities right now through water exchanges. We're looking at temporary water use agreements. We have a lot of communication with industry and municipalities in the basin, and they're quite frequent, and there are more and more applications for those types of use changes coming to our office.
Senator French.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chairman. And to speak to Senator Kolb's question on how's that helping us, if we can keep Glen Canyon Dam, the power plant, going, that's that WAPA, Western Area Power Administration or whatever. A lot of that electricity, I believe, comes up into Wyoming, doesn't it?
Madam Chair, that is correct. There is a significant amount of Wyoming fed through WAPA. And I
And that-
forget what parts, but it goes Cody,
Yeah,
Wheatland, some of those
right.
areas.
There's a WAPA line that goes on McCullough Peak. Some people may not know what that is, but between Powell and Cody.
Yep.
So industry and individuals benefit from that Western Area plan, or WAPA. I just know it as WAPA.
Yep.
So there are considerable benefits from keeping that lake level up to keep that power plant going.
Thank you, Senator.
3490 is the critical elevation we're watching in Lake Powell.
All right, all right. All right, is any further questions, committee? All right, seeing none, we'll appreciate you guys. Thank you for presenting the bill. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Hicks. Seconded by Kolb. All right, are there any amendments on the bill? Any amendments on the bill? Senator Ide.
I don't know if I'm ready to make an amendment, but just to be fiscally responsible for all the constituents of Wyoming, just be careful about adding more employees and a burden on the taxpayers. That's about the only red flag I saw in there. I mean, I understand the issues. I'm in business. You need employees to get the job done. There's no question, but I don't understand it well enough to know how we're overstaffed and understaffed. We just have to rely on the people presenting today, essentially. So that's my only, just a comment.
Thank you, duly noted, Senator Ide. All right, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is critically needed. This money, these people, the Upper Colorado River Water Basin, you lose industry, you lose the state's revenue. So I do always look at, I agree, we have to be careful. But I can tell you that it's getting critical and we need to beef up our staff in order to deal with this. If we don't, you'll be a victim. It's shutting down municipalities. I mean, I think this is really what's necessary. That's my 2 cents on it. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. All right, so we are at that order of business. Are there any amendments on the bill?
Madam Chairman, I didn't take good enough notes.
All
I'm not paid,
right.
So, but I see you've been diligent, so.
I have been diligent, so I
would
will.
entertain a motion.
I
Madam
will,
Chairman.
thank you. I will make the motion to adopt the state engineer's math. So on page 12, line 7, after administration, we would change the number from $1,796,136 to $1,821,089. And we would strike out in the next section 49,906 and make that 24,953. I think we will just take these one at a time. So if I could get a second on that motion on line 7.
Second.
Second, moved by me, seconded by French. All those in favor? Oh, discussion, any discussions? No discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion to amend has been adopted. The next amendment that I would move is on line 19. We would strike 18,924,000 or $294,343 and insert 18,200,000 $319,296. Then we'd go to the next column and strike $8,534,089 and insert $8,509,136. Could I get a second on that motion?
Second.
Moved by me, seconded by French. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no.
No.
That motion has been adopted. The next motion I would make is on line 31. After,
Madam Chairman,
yes, do you have a motion on that?
I don't think it requires a motion.
You don't think it requires a motion. Would you state your reasoning?
So,
Please turn on your microphone.
Madam Chairman, if you go into the footnote down there, it says that funds appropriated to the state engineer's office for the Border Control Division shall be made from the general fund. It doesn't specify in the footnote what category in the state engineer's budget that those funds were appropriated to. So as long as we can explain that that additional $49,000 was for the administrative support side of the budget for the Board of Control, I don't think you have to call it out. It's broad enough that it encompasses that already, because it didn't call out administration, groundwater. It did say Board of Control, but I think that's still broad enough that says appropriated to the state engineer for the Board of Control Division. It wouldn't, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to put some language in there just for clarifying, but I don't know that it's necessary.
Okay, well, Senator Hicks, I'm going to make my motion anyway because I would rather have a belt and suspenders on this area of law that we've been working so diligently to correct for so many years. And so my motion is on line 31, after Board of Control Division, add and the administration. And then it will read, the state engineer for the Board of Control Division and the administration shall be made from the general fund. Could I get a second on that motion? Moved by me, seconded by Cole. Discussion on the amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion has been adopted. Are there any further amendments on the bill? Further amendments? Any discussion on the bill? We had a little before, so, all right. Seeing no discussion, Linda, are you ready to call the roll? Did you get all of our amendments? All right, I hope we didn't go too quickly. All right, would you please call the roll on the bill?
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator Cole.
Aye.
Chairman Stein.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, there are 5 ayes. No.
All right, Senate File 96 Omnibus Water Bill Planning and Administration has passed the committee. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 82 Eligible Water and Sewer Projects Funding. Yes. Who would like to present? Thank you for the reminder, Linda. Who would like to present this bill on the floor? Do I have any volunteers? Any volunteers? Senator French is shrugging his shoulders, so he will be the volunteer. You have been designated.
Madam Chairman, I just had an itch.
Well, you won't want to
I'll-
do that again when we're asking for volunteers.
I'll do my best.
All right, that sounds wonderful. All right. The ominous omnibus water bill. All right, if you need any backup, we'd be glad to help you. So thank you to the state engineers and water development offices for the help on that bill. The next bill we have is Eligible Water and Sewer Projects Funding, and I will call on the chairman of the Select Water Committee to present the bill. It really is a small bill.
Madam Chairman, members of the select or joint or Senate Ag Committee, where am I tonight? Senate File 82 was the eligible water and sewer project funding. This bill actually passed last year. So if you flip over and you look at that budget, this was all of the ARPA funds that were obligated last year. This is the ARPA bill that you saw last year.
Page 2 and 3, committee.
So when you look at this, this is the bill that the legislature passed to obligate all those federal funds through the ARPA. The only thing we're doing here is we're going into, on page 3, and you go into line 4. There was still roughly $78 million of ARPA funds that were unexpended that we carried over. And what this would do would increase that appropriations from $50,000 to $89,300. So let me explain how we come up with that number.
Million, you know.
What's that?
$1,089,000.
So it's $89,300,000. Last year, we appropriated $50 million. So SLIB went out, they put an RFP out. Eligible entities applied for that. I don't remember the total number. I'd probably get that from the director, but there was over $200 million in requested monies. These are for local municipalities, water and sewer districts. So what it showed is we just didn't have enough money in here. And what the 89,300 did is this SLIB has indicated that if we put additional funds in there, and this was in the governor's recommendation too, he didn't quite recommend as much as the Select Water Committee did, but you'll see this in the budget bill also, was to increase the amount of money. What Select Water did was actually look at those applications and say, how many didn't get funded? And there was a substantial number of those. And what we looked at and said, rather than just pick some arbitrary number, because SLIB has told us what they were going to do is probably go back and just award funds to those ones that have already applied that were further down the list. They just couldn't get very far. I'll have the director, do you have those numbers, Beth? Could you please come up?
Yes, yeah, come on up. Welcome to the Ag Committee.
So, Madam Chairman, on those two questions of how much was the total request and how many projects were funded and how far this gets down the list, I'm going to turn it over to somebody that might actually know something about something.
Sounds good. Thank you, Senator Hicks. Oh, thank you for providing that list to us. Appreciate that.
So, Madam Chairman,
Thank you. All right.
Jennifer Scoggin, Director, Office of State Lands and Investments. With me is Beth Blackwell, our Grants and Loans Manager. And also we have Amanda Sewell. She is our Assistant Director for our Administrative and Financial Services Division. So just as by way of background, as Senator Hicks mentioned, back in October, the State Loan and Investment Board entertained some 113 applications totaling $481,868 million in applications. On October 27th, they awarded funding for 27 applications totaling the full $50 million that had been appropriated. As part of the water wastewater program, the projects, in order to be eligible for ARPA funding, have to also be eligible for SRF funding. And so the many
Director
applications
Scoggin,
that were.
If I could just interrupt you, could you please explain the acronyms? Because some of the folks here are not on Select Water, and if you could do that as we go along, I think it'd be really helpful. Thank you very much.
My
Didn't mean to
apologies,
interrupt
Madam
you.
Chairman.
No, that's all right. I know we talk about it all the time, so thank you.
So we do have two state revolving fund programs, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Program and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program. And there are certain criteria in order to be eligible for those programs, as those programs involve federal funds with a 20% state match. Anyway, in order to be eligible for ARPA funds, which is American Rescue and what is it? Okay. Anyway, the water wastewater, the water wastewater projects had to be eligible for the state revolving fund programs. And so all things being equal, if you look at the applications that were received, the SLIBS rules decided to have a ranking system where different points were awarded to each application based on specific criteria. Beth, I don't know if you want to give a little idea of what some of that criteria was.
Some of the criteria was whether the status of the project, was it ready to go? Did it still need to be designed? The amount of match that they were offering, the program required a 15% match. However, entities put in more match, so they got more priority points, which allowed us to stretch the dollar a little further. They received points based on their population. The lower the population, the more priority points they receive because they have a harder time generating the revenue to fund these types of projects. Other areas we provided ranking numbers on is whether the system was a regionalization or creating a regionalized system, whether the project would address a non-compliance issue, and whether they had a plan to finish the project should the project go past the end date of December 2026.
So those applications were all received ranking numbers, and the State Loan Investment Board thought the easiest way to award funds would be to look at the higher ranking projects and kind of work through those. And so the highest ranked project, I think, was 24 points out of 30, and the board was able to fund projects up to, I think, a 16 ranking. And it's interesting to note that there several entities submitted more than one application, and so the board tried to award funds for the entities number one or priority ranked on their own. We didn't rank the priorities for them. We let the applicants prioritize their applications, and then there were some that only did submit one application. And so with that, the board kind of worked through the list of applications, and in some instances, didn't award the full amount of funding, but they tried to award as much as they could in order for those projects to proceed and make the dollars go as far as they could. And so I'll turn it over to Beth here in a minute to explain kind of where we are with that. But I will note that we are in the throes of the local government ARPA funding program with the SLIB. We are receiving applications until January 23rd. Now that program, the water wastewater applications, if it's on behalf of a city, town, county, those are also eligible for the local government pot of money. But the rules and the guidance provided by the legislature was to make the water wastewater projects a lower priority than other potential projects that we might receive applications for. And as of today, I think, what we also allowed was those applications in the water wastewater that did not get funded, if they were eligible for the local government pot of money, we asked them, did you want to put those applications in the local government pot for consideration? And I think we have 24 applicants that have, 26 now, that have asked us to do that. So some of those applications may in fact get funded through the local government pot, but the application period does not close until the 23rd, which is Monday. And we expect to see a number of applications for other types of projects too. So we're going to have to kind of see where that shakes out. But with Madam Chairman, I would turn it over to Beth Blackwell to kind of tell you what's left, if you will, with respect to the program.
Madam Chairman, the handouts I provided to you, the first item was the grants that were awarded at the October 27th meeting. The second attachment is an attachment of those applications still remaining in the pot that were not funded. What we did is we went through what was remaining and using the same methodology that the board utilized of funding only one project per entity and funding, if they put in multiple, funding their first priority rather than anything else, because that was what was most important to the applicant. So what you'll see is the amount was awarded for all of these is 0. And then the next column is the remaining priority ones and single applicant entities that applied one application or submitted one application. So, and then the final column is the running total if we were to approve these grants or approve the dollar amount that was requested. So I was wrong when I told Select Water Committee that it was 39.3. It's actually 71 or 41.7 that would be needed to get through ranking 13. If you wanted to ensure every entity received one grant for one of their applications or this only application, you would need $77,054,371. So the 26 apps that have been moved over, some of them fall into that top 13. So some of those could go away and you could fund further down the list. It's difficult to say how it'll all shake out because we don't know what we're going to get for local governments and how that funding will be spent. That's the big question left is, are we going to be able to fund? Right now it's $36 million in water and sewer requests that came over. Or are we going to be able to fund half of that and the rest goes back to the water and sewer pot? That's the $1 million question is, how much money do you need to make everyone happy? And unfortunately, we don't have that answer.
Madam Chairman, if I could just add on to that, but I
Yes,
think
please do.
Representative Simpson, before he left the Select Water Committee, I think he had counted on us to come up with some sort of number that could help fund more down into the ranking, regardless of whether some of these projects are funded through the local government. Obviously, the need is great and the funds are minimal. And so anyway, that it's kind of a bit of a morass, if you will, trying to predict what's going to happen. But in any event, we would stand for any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you, Director. Senator French?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There's far too many tens of millions running through my brain here. On that page 3, the 50 million, line 4 is scratched out in 89,300,000. So is that's the additional 39 million? Is that, what will that do? Just how far down the list will it take the project requests? Or if some of the requests that were authorized but maybe scrimped to maybe get another project in, would you go back and make them whole? Maybe you took, I don't know, 500,000 out to, they could squeak by, but in order to fund 1 or 2 more projects, how's that work?
Madam Chairman, Senator French, generally during the board meetings, those discussions are had with the applicant. The board will ask the applicant to come forward. They will ask them if they can take a lesser amount. I do believe during the water and sewer meeting, we took a break and they kind of figured out how to spread the dollar a little further. So some of those entities that we had recommended 7.5 million for the projects, they cut those down. Those entities said they could handle the lesser amount. There were a few entities that couldn't take a lesser amount, so they didn't get a haircut.
Senator. Okay, hang on just 1 minute. We have a question from Senator Kolb, and then we'll get back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple general questions. I mean, obviously with runaway inflation, it's caused these projects not to be able to be completed with the first estimates first. Secondarily, there's been ballot initiatives for 1 penny tax initiatives in many areas. And I can assure you some of the projects you have listed here are in fact part of those ballot initiatives that were passed, what do you do to address that? Or do you even, do you ask those questions about funding requirement changes with the passing of a tax initiative?
Madam Chairman, Senator Kolb, honestly, if we received additional money, we would go back out to the water and sewer apps and probably ask if they have updates to their applications, because we've heard there have been some updates to those applications and maybe some of the dollar amounts could be decreased. When it comes to the passage of a 6-penny, we generally don't dig into that, to be quite honest with you. We dig into that when it's pledged as a source of repayment for our loans. We depend on the applicants to be honest on their applications. They sign the applications stating that they certify that the information is true and correct. But we did look at their matching funds, the source of their matching funds. Some of those entities are using their 6-penny for a match or a previously approved 6-penny. It's one of those situations that with the minimal staff we have, those are items that are just not completely vetted. However, we do have loan entities or loan applicants that have been awarded a loan. They've waited to close those loans, hoping that they can get ARPA funds. So a lot of people have a lot of different eggs in their basket trying to fund a lot of projects. So I think some of these entities may have passed a tax for the project, and the tax is now not enough to complete the project, is something that we have been seeing with some of our loan applicants.
Yeah, just to follow up. Obviously, that when they signed the application, they probably didn't have a past 6 cent, right? I mean, I believe that to be truth. However, you could in fact cause a tax overrun collection situation because they will use the extra money to fund other like projects. And I'm afraid that is a potential when it comes to getting money in and having a tax initiative. So they went to the voters with a tax initiative that said, hey, in Sweetwater County, we're going to approve, I don't know what it was, $85 million, right? And within that $85 million, a lot of these projects, not all of them, but some of them are in there. And that is the question. What are we doing about this? I think to be fair to the voters, all right, I think it looks like a bait and switch. I know they made application in good faith, but they didn't know it was going to pass. But what do we do now with these funds that has the potential of basically having a, overfunded situation? I mean, barring the, if they didn't have proper foresight with the inflation, because they well knew about it before this tax initiative happened. That's probably more of a local issue. But I'm just concerned that we are sending money to some place that doesn't need it, and we're cutting off other folks that need it. That's my concern.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. That's a very good point. And are we I think the question I would add on to your question is, are we coordinating with local county assessors or the people the treasurer that is collecting those taxes to know if those initiatives have passed, and could we do that to see if that could be a part of our process?
Madam Chairman, let me say one thing first. I think because of the amount of time that's transpired since the program initially received applications earlier this fall, as we step through the local government and we look at applications, I think it's fair and valid to follow up with the applicants to make sure that that is still in fact the case, that this is the project that they're working on. What are their match sources? What are their other sources to help fund that? And is this still the amount that they require, or is there something else? And so I think Beth and her staff, as they've received calls and perhaps emails from folks wanting to transfer their applications to the local government. As we work through those local government applications, we will be doing that. With respect to following up, if we know that there's been a tax passed, Beth, I'll leave that to you to, perhaps we can have people reach out to whoever in local government and see what the situation with those are. So, I mean, Senator Kolb, I appreciate your point. I do.
Right. All right, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got, philosophically, I've got a lot of problems with all of this federal dependency. These, this is all funny money, and it's what's causing inflation. And, we call it the Inflation Reduction Act, ARPA. I mean, it's just all counterfeit they're printing out of thin air that our future generations have to pay back. I don't know what the answers are. I mean, I understand, we've got this pot of money and everybody's trying to divvy it up and figure out what to do with it. I don't know if one of the options is just to say we don't want it and we don't want federal dependency. I mean, it's a drug, and we have to be careful with this drug. It infects everybody, and it's a regressive. The lower class is the one that can't keep up with inflation, and wages just aren't keeping up with it. So that's really all I wanted to say. I mean, I understand everybody's trying to do their job and figure out how to divvy this stuff up and what's right and what's wrong, but we need to take a hard look at what we're doing with all this funny money that's floating around. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ide. Senator Hicks, did you have something you were going to say a little while ago?
Madam Chairman, I think the director and Beth did a good job. I concur with Senator Ide, and I just know when you have an addiction to a drug that it's pretty tough, cold turkey. So we got to wean these folks off.
All right, well, if there are no further questions, I say we get on with this bill. Thank you so much for being here late with us tonight. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Beth. All right, thank you, Director. All right, Senator Hicks, did you want to come back to work on this bill, or? All right. So, committee, we've had this discussion quite a bit, and I'm just going to take the liberty of addressing some of Senator Ide's concerns, because when Senator Hicks and I served on the Appropriations Committee and all of the ARPA funding came through to the state of Wyoming, these discussions were had and hashed, and we talked about these things, and we lamented over them, quite frankly. And the decision I came to, and the reason I have supported the ARPA bill, is because our children and grandchildren will be paying this off far into the future, regardless of what the state of Wyoming decides, because they will, someone is going to spend this money. Wyoming had an allocation of it, and it was my estimation and input from some of the people back home that I would rather convert this into usable projects on the ground that our citizens and our children need to survive and to make our economy work and to support our municipalities and our towns and all of those things. And so that is my reason for that I have supported this all along, and the rationale I came to as I grappled with the same issues that you're grappling with today. So with that said, is there any, committee, what is your pleasure on this bill? We are adding 39.9 or $39.3 million to the bill under the eligible water and sewer projects. And so with that, what's your pleasure, committee?
Move the bill.
Moved by Hicks, seconded by Kolb. Are there any amendments to the bill?
Madam Chairman,
Senator
The
Hicks.
director pointed out, and I think it's just a technical, if we can have staff look at, so if you go to page 3, and you go to 17 on the total down there,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't appear to add up, so if we can just check on that.
All
and Make
right.
sure that that total with the addition of the 39.3 is correct. But Madam Chairman, we just lost staff the latitude to check that, and if it's a technical correction, just to make that correction.
Linda, can you make a notation for staff on that? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Let's have discussion on the bill then. Senator
Thank you,
Ide.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm new. Obviously, I keep saying that. I think I'm a no vote on this. It's not really not going to do any good. I know it'll probably get to the floor and the money's there. Just consciously have a hard time dealing with this situation here with this dependency that we're creating with our federal government, that the money they're sending in, just sending prices sky high. And we're somewhat complicit with that if we keep doing this. So I just wanted to get that out there just consciously. I'm really having a hard time with even voting for this bill, but it doesn't really do any good to not vote for it. I mean, it does. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ide. Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, it's music to my ears, but as I've stated earlier, these monies are already in the state coffers. If they don't go to water and sewer projects, they'll get spent on trails and some frivolous that doesn't build infrastructure. So I'd like to drive a stake in the ground on federal funding, but at this point in time, I want to pick my battles and be surgically, and I'd certainly like to start with the Department of Education and the scraps that they throw us and all the requirements they put on that. So I'm going to support the bill. I philosophically agree with everything Senator Ide says. I just want to pick the fight in the right place. This money's going to be spent it'll go to trails, something that doesn't benefit as many people in our infrastructure. So it's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the pill we have. Let's be strategic on where we want to drive that stake in the ground. I got my ideas, and I'm sure you've got some, but I don't know. I'm ready to drive a stake right now.
Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is really, really a tough vote. I agree with Senator Ide. I'm going to vote yes to advance it to the floor for further discussion. I'm not sure exactly how I'll vote on third reading, but there's a lot of towns. I mean, you go through here, there's a whole lot of people that will have their sewer plant modernized, their aging pipelines, water pipelines, you name it, will be improved for future, our kids and grandkids and great grandkids. So I agree, this is really a hard one for me, but I'll vote to advance it.
Thank you, Senator French. Senator Cole.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman, as we're all stating our dislike and distrust of the federal government. I will say this money has been allocated in a way that I feel makes the best of it. And that's why I'm supportive of it. This could have gone to a lot of other things. So it in fact forwards the issue of infrastructure problems, and we could have a really large discussion, and frankly, I'm not going to be out conservative by somebody by grabbing the high ground of being pious. And I think it bothers everybody that we all know this, but it's already been allocated. It has been diverted. It was converted from one type of monies to this type of money. There's been a lot of things that's happened to this money. So it isn't as it first arrived. I'll just say it like that, in my opinion. So, little old Wyoming's not going to make any darn difference in this big scheme of things with this kind of situation. The American Recession Plan, as I call it, has indeed panned out that way. But here we are, and we're making the best of it for the benefit of the state and the benefit of the small communities. And I'm afraid at this point, that's the best I can say about this. It's a bitter pill sometimes when you talk about the overall issue, but I think this is the best we can do with it, and that's why I'll support it. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. Seeing that we've all had our chance to, we call for the question. All right, would you please take the roll, Linda?
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Aye.
Senator Ice,
No.
Senator Cole.
Soft aye.
That's the little I, that's the Roman empire.
Aye.
So there are 4 ayes and 1 no.
Thank you, Linda. And so the bill has passed. Who would like to carry this bill on the floor? All right. Senator Kolb will carry it. It will be re-referred to appropriations because there's an appropriation in it, and then it will be back on the floor later on. So with that, committee, good work. Thank you all for staying late tonight. We appreciate it. And we've gotten through all of these bills. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.